Good morning. We're gonna get this meeting started. We are waiting on just a couple board members, but we have enough to get started. Happy April Fool's Day to everybody. April 1st, and it sounds like we're expecting a snowstorm, so Mother Nature is being really funny today. I think we'll get started with introductions and hopefully we've got one board member showing up. So, I am Erica Sawatzke, chair of the board and turkey producer.
Dr. Peggy Ann Hawkins, member of the board specializing in livestock and swine, and I'm from Northfield, Minnesota.
Steve Neal, member of the board, cattle producer from Northfield.
Abigail Maynard, veterinarian, specializing in small animal medicine.
Everyone, Michelle Medina, I serve as Director of Government Relations with Department of Agriculture and the Board of Animal Health.
Hey, good morning, everyone. Stephan Schaefbauer, area veterinarian in charge for USDA APHIS Veterinary Services, Minnesota.
Brian Hayes, state that for Minnesota and executive director for the Minnesota Board of Animal Health.
Good morning, I'm Hemant Naikare, Minnesota Diagnostic Lab Director in St. Paul and Wilmington.
Erin Kreider, one of the communications specialists at Board of Animal Health.
Dr. Steve Comisto, a senior veterinarian for the companion animal programs at the Board of Animal Health.
Michael Crusan, communications director at the Board of Animal Health.
Shauna Voss, veterinarian with the Minnesota Board of Animal Health.
Eric Job, assistant director with the Board of Animal Health.
Andrew Glad, staff attorney for the Minnesota Board of Animal Health.
Alex Stady, a board member, a cow producer, and member of the Shocking Walk and Sioux community.
Heather DeVito, veterinarian for the Board of Animal. Addie Evans, single K, farm survey program administrator for the Board of Animal Health.
Paul Anderson, the MBMA, chairman of the Small Animal Welfare Committee.
Melissa Smith, the business manager for the Minnesota Board of Animal Health.
Mary Wood, veterinarian, Minnesota DNR.
Michelle Carstensen, wildlife health program supervisor in Minnesota DNR.
Maya Walker, compliance supervisor for the
Dan Callahan, communication specialist for the board.
Nicole Neeser, director of the dairy inspection division at Minnesota.
I'll introduce myself. And that, if you have any issues, problems, Michelle can help you out here. She knows the facility well, so if there's something. Also, welcome and use it anytime you want. So, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, is there a motion to approve the February meeting minutes? Is there a second?
I'll second that.
There's been a motion and a second to approve. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say sign. Motion carries. Is there a motion to approve our agenda for today? Is there a second?
Second.
There's a motion and a second for the approval of agenda today. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Okay, we'll now move on to our Board of Animal Health update with Brian.
Just everything. That's good. All right. I will just dive right in. Agency update. So just kind of the things that are that we're juggling, kind of primary on my agenda. Budget. I think we've heard a lot about the budget. There have been some, and actually Melissa, I think, is giving some more budget updates. So I won't go into a lot of details, but we've had to do a little juggling with our budget. I think we're getting that sorted out with some of the federal funding that is soon to be back in our hands. The legislative session, whoa, that's been that's been up and down, and I can tell you, I know why Michelle speaks so quickly. Because there's a lot going on, there's a lot of bills. I think we've testified or been available for testifying basically the last 3 weeks, almost every day. So there's a lot going on that affects both the board and the Department of Ag and us collectively. Some recent updates, return to office. I think this was made public last week. Governor Walz ordered all state employees to return to the office at least 50% of the time. So that's a shift that we are adjusting to, working on. I don't know that it's a final deal. There's some negotiations going on with the labor unions, but more to come on that, I guess. I just bring that to light because a majority of our staff actually are teleworking. So this is going to be a change in how we structure our facilities, making sure we have enough office space for everyone. So additional work for Melissa to kind of sort all that out. And then, of course, high path avian influenza H5N1 is constantly on our radar and constantly keeping us on our toes. Some changes that some of these things we talked about at the last meeting, but just to kind of give you some updates. The BCAP audit, so biosecurity compliance audit program. So this is the program that was rolled out or interim rule at the end of the year. So beginning the 1st of January. Basically, it's tied to indemnity for flocks either that have been affected by highly pathogenic avian influenza or are within a control area buffer zone, having to undergo these additional audits, more scrutiny with these audits. So the rollout was a little clunky to start with. We were kind of stumbling through it, but it's still being discussed, being negotiated. It was extended, if I'm not mistaken, Dr. Schaefbauer, the comment period has been extended to add some more remarks and comments to that. So how many of those audits have we done, Dr. Voss? 3 so far. Okay, so more to come on here with the final determination on that one is. Pre-market high path avian influenza surveillance. So I brought this up at the last meeting. There was a pilot program that was going to be issued basically to Minnesota and South Dakota to do pre-slaughter surveillance. Just one more check within 72 hours of birds going to slaughter. That's kind of on hold. I haven't heard anything about that since probably February. I think with some of the transition with the new administration, some of the changes in how we're approaching high path, that one got put on the back burner. So nothing more to add for that one. Horse Protection Act. I think I brought this up last time. There was some regulatory action being taken to kind of influence how horse shows were managed, and specific to the walking horse industry, saddlebred, some of those high stepping horses, they've had kind of a history of bad reputation for how they treated their horses, some of the training techniques. So this act was really kind of to further investigate those kinds of activities. But the way the rule was being designed, it kind of was all encompassing. It seemed to cover more general shows. And actually there were some concerns that it would affect just our general, WCA shows, weekend shows that we have here in Minnesota. That one has been put on hold or extended comment period as well. So more to come on that. My last bullet there is vaccines. So vaccines are a big topic when we're talking about our disease responses. So obviously high path, that one seems to come and go. There's been a little bit of back and forth on how we're going to approach high path avian influenza moving forward, what the new administration would like to do, and will vaccines be a part of that? Will they not? And the opinion has kind of bounced back and forth. At this point, it sounds like the opinion is we want to investigate these vaccines and see if there's a vaccine that is viable in use for protection against high path avian influenza, something that we can have to add to our toolbox. Minnesota has always advocated for this. If a vaccine becomes available, I've said that we will approve it instantly and get it in the hands of producers, so we can start getting some more protection. The other vaccine I wanted to mention is the vaccine for avian metapneumovirus. That was, I think at our last meeting, I discussed there was approval to import killed vaccine from Europe. We had that approval. The killed vaccine was of limited use. It had some protection, but not a lot. We were really looking for modified live vaccine. That got approved for import, but there's kind of steps along the way between import and actually getting it into producers' hands. I think it was around February that the final approval process happened and people were allowed to start ordering the vaccine. So being able to get that in the hands of some of our poultry companies and producers to be able to do some vaccinating. But as you can imagine, there's always hiccups, there's roadblocks. There's a lot of people that wanted that vaccine. So there's a little bit of a bottleneck in the production and getting that distributed. I'm hearing from other states that there's a hold time kind of across the country. And then there's also a concern about the length of time that vaccine is approved. So this started with a 1-year approval. So that will expire, I think, Dr. Schaefbauer, does that expire at the end of the year or the end of the fiscal year?
I thought it was the end of the calendar year.
That's how I understood it too. The other part of that is it takes like a 6 to 8 month lead time to get the vaccine ordered or for manufacturers to be able to produce the vaccine. So really what we're looking at is we need the USDA to extend that approval by the end of the summer. So we can get the vaccine companies or have the vaccine companies on board or maintain their production to keep having vaccine available. Our old friend African swine fever. I just wanted to give you an update on that rascal. So I always get nervous. We talk about high path H5N1 all the time, and I don't want us to lose sight of some of these other diseases that are still very much a concern to us. So this is a recent map for African swine fever in Europe. The other ones that we're obviously concerned about are Haiti and the Dominican Republic. There really isn't a lot of change. That country is still affected, but this map shows the kind of the Western countries that are affected. So everything in red is affected. They have African swine fever, and all those little dots are new cases since the first of the year. So my point with this is it's not going away. It's still circulating quite a bit in Western civilization. We look at Italy has new infections from time to time. That one scares you because it seems to be along a track of a lot of tourist kind of attractions, and the suspicion is that there's probably just some garbage that's getting thrown out, and the feral swine are getting into it, and the virus is getting spread that way. So there's little pockets you can see in the middle of all that red that is only a matter of time as far as everyone's concerned. There's no barriers to keep it out. And again, the culture in those areas is, wild boar hunting is kind of part of their heritage. So they don't want to get rid of their wild boar population, but that's what's kind of keeping this virus circulating. So I point this out because these are trading partners. These are people that we not only trade in pork, but other animals too. So we get updates constantly about what countries have African swine fever. So Dr. Cavisto and his team can keep tabs on what companion animals might be coming and going from those areas, and observing kind of our restrictions and cleaning and disinfecting protocols to make sure that we're not dragging something new home. But again, just kind of pointing out that that virus is still out there and going a little bit unchecked in some of the Western world. New World screwworm is another one that we brought up last fall, and this map just kind of shows you again where it's circulating. So this is a recent map within the last, I think this was an update from within the last year as well. The ones we worried about were the incursions into Mexico, because now we're one country away from those flies being around. But you can see the amount of shading reflects how much of this screwworm is in those countries. So as you move farther south, those countries are just inundated with it. The U.S. has worked very closely with their counterparts in those countries to get to get some of the sterile male flies. So just a reminder, these flies mate once, and if they mate with a sterile male, then they lay infertile eggs. So that's kind of the way they attack this, getting a lot of sterile male flies in the area so that there aren't as many larvae that are being hatched. So still a concern. A lot of this is just unchecked cattle movements. There's not a lot of adherence to international movement in those countries with some of the livestock. And frankly, there's a lot of cattle smuggling that happens. But again, something we're keeping tabs on. It's fairly distant from us up here in the mainland, but it's just one step closer. And we do have a lot of trade with Mexico and cattle moving back and forth. Probably not so much that southern part, but it's something that we want to keep as far away from us as possible. This is the one that really keeps me up at night. So foot and mouth disease. Again, this is the latest map. I think this is from the first of the year as well. Yeah. So we talked about Germany having the first case of foot and mouth disease in a backyard herd of water buffalo. Since then, they have had additional detections in Slovakia and Hungary. So there's a little dot there that shows some of the new ones. Austria is also being kind of guilt by association added to the list just because of the proximity to the border with Hungary. So the detections in Hungary were like 4 miles from the Austrian border. So we're under restrictions on movement for Austria as well as Hungary and then Slovakia and Germany. Again, this is the one that really keeps me up at night. This one isn't just a pig disease. It's not just a bird disease. This affects pigs, cows, goats, sheep, deer, any cloven hoofed animals, and it spreads very rapidly, very easily. So I'm pretty nervous about this one making it into Germany. And then seems like it's spreading and they still don't know exactly how it got to Germany. So that's probably the biggest scare is we don't know how it got there. Now you can all stay up at night too. All right, these are kind of our domestic issues that we're dealing with. And I guess I rattled about these a little bit already. Obviously, highly pathogenic avian influenza is constantly on our radar. We still have our incident management team stood up to respond to these. I'm happy to report that our last detection in a commercial flock was in January. So we are actually at the point of being declared free of highly pathogenic avian influenza in commercial poultry in Minnesota. Now, the last time we did that, we got a case about a month later. So, and we recognize this is kind of a small win, a window of quiet that likely is going to change in the next days or week, just with the migration. H5N1 in livestock. I'll just kind of skip through these because I've got some more slides specific to those. So H5N1 in livestock, we're working with Department of Ag in their milk surveillance. Avian metapneumovirus is still circulating in Minnesota, still working on getting that under control. Really excited to have access to vaccine that probably is more effective than the killed virus that we originally had, but still waiting to get some reports back on that. And then that last bullet point is just to talk about some of the behind the scenes work that we're doing that isn't related to emergency response in the field. So working on what our response plans would look like for African swine fever, and then firing up our foot and mouth disease response plans. So just making sure they're up to date, understanding that those diseases are not as far away as we'd like them to be, and making sure we are as prepared as we can be. Okay, highly pathogenic avian influenza. So I already said our last detection was back in January. We are continuing to do surveillance. Every week we're getting half a dozen or more samples brought into the diagnostic lab or NPTL for testing, just sick birds. Mortalities are spiking and we're still watching for it. But as I said, knock on wood, everything has come back negative and generally it's come back as avian metapneumovirus infection. All that being said, we know the spring wave is coming. This this map is from last Friday. So that was the updates, the newest cases. You can kind of see, Michigan, Ohio, Indiana, Illinois are the hotspots now, Missouri. So you get kind of the idea, this is the migration starting to move north. So we're not in the hot spot yet, but we will be probably within a week's time, and we'll see where it goes. The national attention you probably heard has been on the egg shortage. So initially we were hearing from Secretary Rollins that there were a lot of measures being put in place to increase the number of eggs available to consumers and decrease the price of eggs. So we pushed back a little bit on that from Minnesota on a few different angles, because we want to remind them turkey people are suffering from this too. So I think consumers recognize the issue with eggs, because there's eggs in everything. Everyone who wants to bake or go out to eat, there's been surcharges with relation to the egg shortage. So it brought national attention to the high path concerns, but it seemed like they got focused primarily to the layer industry. I think since then we've had some influence. Some of our senators, Senator Klobuchar and Smith, were able to get some Minnesota influence, as well as Minnesota turkey growers and National Turkey Grower Association. I think we were able to kind of realign things. So it's open now, I guess, is where I'm going with that. So there's programs designed now to help with biosecurity and give some more assistance to our other poultry industries, and primarily our turkey industry. And then my last bullet point is we kind of just have to understand, and this has been our soapbox for a while, that this virus isn't going away. I've given several briefings over the winter or the early spring, and kind of that's my point. We can't consider this foreign animal disease anymore. It's here. We used to have these spikes, and I wonder if my next slide has that. We used to have these spikes where, the migration comes, that's when we get cases, and then summer we get kind of a lull, and then spikes again in the fall. So that blue line is 2022. That's when it came back the first time, and we had just a surge of cases in the spring, kind of went away for the summer and came back a little bit in the fall. But then you can see kind of the trends with those other lines, where maybe not as high a spike, but they're steadier. And it's just an indication that there's local reservoirs that are harboring that virus. It's not moving with the birds anymore. It's found a way to stay around, or the birds have decided to stay around. So I do think it's kind of neat. I shouldn't be saying it out loud, but that yellow line is this year, and it's taken a nice plummet, just like I said. But when you compare it to 2022, it's kind of a nice transition. There's a graphic that I meant to get from Ashley Coles at Minnesota Turkey Growers Association that actually kind of highlights how Minnesota is doing at preventing this disease. So we still have cases, but she's got a really neat table that shows Minnesota compared to the nation, how the cases continue to spike nationwide, but Minnesota's cases continue to drop in comparison. So even though we are still getting cases, we're getting better at our biosecurity and keeping it at bay, but we still get cases. And I can say that, but people who end up with a positive flock aren't comforted too much by that. So it's still something that we need to figure out a better way, a better plan. Biosecurity is huge, but vaccine would be helpful. There's other things in place that I think could alter the course even more and give us even more better results. So still working on that. Milk surveillance sampling. I'm not going to talk too much about this because Dr. Neeser, I believe, will be giving you an update, but just briefly, we started, Department of Agriculture started the national milk surveillance at the end of February. The protocol is when there's a positive case, the Board of Animal Health gets notified. We go out and pull another sample just to try to verify that it is indeed from that farm, and we're managing or monitoring where the infection is. If there is a positive, the premises is quarantined. That quarantine includes permitted movement, so we do allow movement of animals, non-lactating animals primarily, but we want to know where they're going. Similarly, manure management is part of the the quarantine process. So we allow manure to move, but with a permit. So we know it's not going someplace that could potentially infect another herd or a flock. And then milk is not withheld other than sick cows. So if a herd is tested positive, they're still allowed to ship their milk, has to go to pasteurization. Most of the milk does, and pasteurization is effective at killing the virus. So we want to make sure that message is getting out there. Milk is safe as long as it's pasteurized. And then last bullet point is just, we're kind of cringing about that spring migration again, just the idea of overlap with poultry and dairy industry, both getting cases. Now I did it. Sorry. Oh, take a picture. Okay. This is the most recent dairy cases. So this is again from last Friday. This is what came out. So it's been a little bit quiet. California and Idaho are the two states still. Well, California is still dealing with their ongoing cases. So kind of related to what started last fall. Idaho had a couple of new herds that tested positive as part of their milk surveillance last week. All of the other shaded states or states that have been affected at one point during this since last year. Nevada and Arizona had new cases this spring, and they're of note because they're a different sequence of the virus. So we talked about the B313 strain of this virus last year. That's what was circulating in our dairy cattle and really our poultry last summer. And that's what California is really dealing with. Nevada and Arizona had new cases that were the D1.1 strain, which is concerning because that's the strain that's been circulating in migratory waterfowl. So if you remember, the B313 strain was not in migratory waterfowl. It was being spread specifically primarily by dairy cattle. So this new situation with D1.1 being in dairy cattle, they're saying it is directly from wild birds. It's individual introduction. So these herds aren't spreading it amongst themselves; they're getting it from birds. So that's going to change the game quite a bit. Just knowing that we're not just trying to keep cows and poultry apart. Now we have to worry about the migratory and wild birds that are in and around dairy farms. Just a little bar graph of the dairy cases, starting from last year, about end of March when we saw the first cases in Texas. All that big spike, that's California. And then these cases kind of off to the right are the newer ones that we're seeing in continuing in California, but also the newer ones that we're seeing in Idaho, Nevada, and Arizona. And then there's Minnesota. So we had our first detection of H5N1 in dairy cattle. It's been about 2 weeks ago now. It's an interesting case. It's a case that was actually, I think it was our last positive case from last year. So it's a repeat case. And what that means, we aren't exactly sure. So part of the interesting thing, well, aside from that, is the CT value. So we talk about these CT values when they're doing PCR to test for the virus. The CT refers to how much cycling has to occur before they can pick up virus to detect. So the higher the number, the less particles that are there. So it takes longer to find them. So high CTs mean that there isn't much particles there. When we look at some of what we would consider hot cases. So last summer, some of these dairy farms were in the teens or 20s, and certainly our poultry cases that are really hot. The CT values are usually high teens, mid 20s. So when you start to get to 35 and above, those are either waxing and waning, or it's a new infection starting. So trying to determine where that's at is part of the investigations that we do. So did a follow-up test then next week, and the CT values went up to 37. So this is suggesting that this is an infection that's going away, that we're at the tail end of it. The virus particles are even fewer and farther between. The big questions we get are, is this a continued infection from last year, or is this a new infection? And that's where I've got the sequencing bullet point. So the downside of these high CTs is there's not much viral material there to draw from. So it's hard to get a sequence from, and a lot of times we can't even find it once you get above 35. So we're waiting to see if NBSL can do some sequencing just to answer some of those questions and give us a better picture of what's happening at this farm. But we're not holding our breath just because those CT values are so high. We likely won't find out which strain it is. So disappointing from that aspect. It's interesting that we are able to pick it up at that low of a level of viral particles. So more to come. That herd is under quarantine and will continue doing weekly testing until they have negative test results. I just wanted to chat real quick about this. So I talked last time about some wild and domestic cats that were infected with H5N1 through consuming raw pet food. I think that was Oregon and Washington State had some pet food recalls, but it affected animals in Colorado, Washington, and Oregon. Recently, California has had a similar situation. So they have recalled some pet food from a pet food company in California that markets as a raw pet food, and they have had cases in California, Colorado, New York, Pennsylvania, and Washington of cats that have gotten sick from this distribution. So our message here is pasteurized and cooked food is safe. So not just for you, but also for your pets. That's all I have to say on that. And this one is directly related to California poultry products. Avian metapneumovirus, I mentioned this already. It's still circulating in Minnesota. We've got the importation of modified live vaccine that we're excited about. I think I said all this stuff. We've approved the import of the vaccine, but delays in getting that to the companies has been reported. And then we are working with USDA to extend the approval for another year at least to make sure that we have enough vaccine on hand that we can try to tackle this avian metapneumovirus and get it out of our state. That's my updates. Questions?
I have two questions.
Yes.
Okay, so the first one is maybe kind of a silly question, and I don't know if anybody knows, but with this dairy farm that is now infected as a repeat, do we know, did that virus go away? So it is another introduction, or can it stay in that herd?
Heading up some different research projects kind of related to that. So how is this virus sticking around? Where is it sticking around? So we're trying to get the producer to jump on board with some of these projects to try to sort that out. I mean, there's a lot of questions. We don't know, how does this stay in the mammary gland for a cow that's drying up? So is it possible that it's harbored during that dry period and then is fired back up once they come back into their next lactation? So we don't know. And that's the point with the sequencing. If we could tell which virus we're dealing with, that would answer some of those questions. So if it came back as a D1.1, then we know that's a completely new introduction.
Yeah.
But if it comes back as a 3.13, then maybe it's the same one, but then we have to figure out if it's still circulating. But that's the question. And because because it's such a low viral load, it's hard to get that information easily.
Sure. Okay, and then my second and last question is on, so these dairy farms with manure movement that's permitted. My question is, so like on my farm, my poultry litter, I can stockpile. You can't do that on a dairy farm. So when they're full, I mean that they have to move that manure. So how are we working with producers, I guess, to make sure that we're moving that safely, if that makes sense? I mean, are we helping them plan their routes, or telling them, no, you can't spread it here, but maybe this is a different option. Can you just take like 30 seconds to explain that?
Yeah, and I might have Eric jump in a little bit. It's kind of case by case. So we do have farms that have lagoons and there's no worry about them moving manure. They can hold it for extended periods of time. But we also have farms that are moving it daily. So understanding where it's going is part of the permitting process, making sure you know the routes and avoiding areas where it could come into contact with other susceptible herds, susceptible flocks. So go ahead, Eric, if you have.
Yeah, so with the permitting process, we know exactly what fields they're going to,
Sure.
with that manure, how it's getting there, and when it's getting incorporated. So, you know, if it's mainly liquid and they're land applying it, we wanted it incorporated into the ground as soon as possible, hopefully within 12 hours, if not sooner. So most of these places are able to actually inject it in, so it's automatically injected. Many of these larger farms with the big lagoons have, or they either do it themselves or they hire any companies, so they're dragging the lines, so they're not going across roads, those types of things. We also look at where other poultry farms are, so we're trying to keep it away from nearby poultry farms if they don't.
There's some research also trying to determine how viable this virus is in cow manure too. So
Sure.
it's there. It's not assumed that it's spread in the manure, but it's the discarded waste milk that gets dumped into the gutter or to the manure pit that is of concern. And what does that do to the virus? Does that deactivate it? Does it sustain it? Those are some research projects that are ongoing as well.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions for Brian?
I have a question. Make it awkward.
Welcome, Dr. Ty.
Oh, with I couldn't see the slides, so I didn't want to die, but with the cats part, are you doing anything, or like, do you guys have any like graphics or anything that we could share on social to help educate people about not feeding the raw food diets and like why it's a risk?
Have we, between the Department of Ag, I don't know if we have. Sometimes they were just showing me. I don't know. It's up there. There's a thing. Yeah, but
I thought we had worked on something to put on the website, but maybe that got put on hold for.
We haven't created specific collateral to raw pet food for pets, but it's something that we highlight as a talking point whenever media interviews us to say that we do not support raw pet food diets.
Sure.
But something to consider adding.
Yeah,
we
it
can-
might be, I mean, I think lots of us would like blast it, you know, and it would be help. I just think graphics are good, like for the Facebook algorithms and everything to get them and to catch people's attention, you know.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, it's kind of in vogue to be going to these all natural raw diets and not recognizing the risk. So this is just one example of a risk. I would say this highlights why
Right.
those diets are not necessarily safe. This is a virus, but there's plenty of other bacteria and things that can be in those raw diets too.
For sure. I think I've talked to lots of my friends about like E. coli and salmonella and blah, 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 but I think like in people's, like it's even like a treatable thing, right? But if you're like, your cat will die, like there isn't a treatment, you know?
Yeah, not high likelihood of recovery. Yeah.
Any other questions for Brian? All right, thank you for your update. We will now move on to our College of Vet and Med.
She's having trouble connecting, so I
Okay.
think we'll have Dr. Naikare go
Sure.
first.
All right,
That's all right.
yep,
Yes.
BDL update, go ahead.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Hemant Naikare with the Veterinary Diagnostic Lab, and just have a few updates since the last 2 months we met. I think we met on February the 2nd or 4th, and the last 60 days, a lot of good updates. So the first and foremost is, our lab had an external audit which happened sometime late fall of 2024. And the audit resulted in full accreditation. So this happens every 5 years. And this allows us to be part of the National Animal Health Lab Network. There are 60 plus labs in those networks. It allows us to do testing for non-scope diseases such as high-fat AI, ASF, CSF. And so it kind of endorses that the work that we do is of great quality, and it allows us to do things for disease diagnostics and disease surveillance. So both of our laboratories, the lab in St. Paul, which is an all animal species lab, we do full service, basically microbiology, pathology. Pathology includes necropsies and tissues, samples testing and all. The only fact that we don't have is toxicology. And so we utilize other labs in the network, whether it's a Michigan lab or other labs. It's just so difficult to maintain certain disciplines because the cost of the equipment is humongous. And then you have to have enough sample load to do that. But besides that, and besides electron microscopy, we are a full service lab in St. Paul. And in Wilmer, our lab is a poultry testing lab specifically, but our crew there is also having taken the ASF and some of the big tests, so that if we are having, if we are overwhelmed, they have the infrastructure there and they can help us with some sort of swine testing. We need to find people, but we at least have the infrastructure in place. Some great updates on the personal side. We recently filled a couple of positions, and proud to announce that Dr. Meg Moore, she's a board certified anatomic pathologist, somebody who can read biopsies and tissues. So she started on March 17th. She comes from Antech, and prior to that, she worked at the VDL. So we are excited to have her. This allows us to do more on the biopsy side of testing, which we were lacking. That was a gap, and she will also help us with resident training. So it's really good to have Meg on board. And it actually will allow us to do a lot of testing for the veterinary medical center, the teaching hospital, to start with, and then we will start helping other clinics around. We were also fortunate to recruit Dr. Talita Resendi. She is going to join as a food animal diagnostician on May the 12th. She comes from Ohio State. She works as an extension veterinarian over there, has a master's in pathology from Brazil, had done a PhD at the U. And so, the folks are excited to have her on board because her hiring overlaps with our upcoming retirement of Dr. Stephanie Rosso. If you're a big producer, you know Dr. Rosso really well. For the last 26 years, she has been overseeing molecular diagnostic section as well, and I think she must have been with us for almost 30 years. She has decided to take her retirement, and she's retiring July the 7th. So having Dr. Talita Resendi join us will at least help us have some overlap. And then when Dr. Rosso retires, we are trying to replace her position as well. So with all the economic uncertainties and all the political situations, so we keep our fingers crossed because we don't know what's going to happen, in the state and at the federal level. So funding is critical, and then the Molgaard joins, I think she will kind of touch base a little bit on that as well. Also, after a year and a half of search, we have got our poultry diagnostician position locked in. So Dr. Varvara Semenova, she will be joining us end of August. She's finishing her residency in Florida, and she did her DVM at UC Davis. She's very interested in, picking up on the commercial poultry aspect of it. So she'll be here next week in April. We are already in April, so next week is the Poultry Production Expo, and then there is a conference at the same time, so she'll get to interact with our stakeholders. So those are the personal updates. And then a little bit on ongoing surveillance and research. Dr. Brian has actually covered really well. So I will not go in any of those details, but I just wanted to highlight some bullets. So starting from Feb 27th, we started doing the Minnesota State milk surveillance for high path in the dairy herds. And I think we have done about 1,400 plus farms. The goal is to have, there are 1,600 farms and at least 75% of those herds would be tested at least once a month. And I think we are on target because we completed more than 1,400 tests in the first month. As Brian pointed out, we have had one positive herd, and that was positive by PCR, which means although it was weak positive, but we did detect some viral particles by genetic testing. It was also positive by ELISA, which is a serology test, which means that there has been prior exposure, which goes well with, this premise was positive a year ago as well, right? So we don't know how long those antibodies last. And those are the questions which our other cattle research project, which has just started in March, will allow us to answer, like, if you have an infection, how long it stays, how long the antibodies last. So we are trying to do that for Minnesota. At the same time, we are also helping California, state of California was hit really badly. And so we are helping them with some of these antibody testing and research testing on the PCR side. So some of those answers, you were asking about whether the virus is the same virus or different virus, is it mutating, does it impact, does it cause abortions? If you change the colostrum, what will happen? Those are the questions California lab is trying to address, researchers there, and some of those we'll be doing in our lab. And last but not the least, I wanted to mention about the Association of Public Health Laboratories and CDC. That fellowship application has opened, and our laboratory at both locations now are approved to be a lab as a host lab. And my goal is to at least recruit 6 fellows. It is so difficult to find funding for people. We have the infrastructure, but personnel is a situation that we are fighting every day. So through this funding, we should be able to, it's about recruiting. So we could get at least half a dozen new people for at least 1 or 2 years who can work on special projects, whether it is to do with high-path AI or avian metapneumovirus or antimicrobial resistance. So that is one of a multi-pronged approach to find funding when funding at the state level is dwindling, or even the federal funding in some buckets is dwindling. The HiPath gave us good media coverage. We have had at least 5, either an audio or a radio or a TV coverage on the HiPath. It started with dairy farms beginning to do bird flu testing, and then the last one was we had no positives. That was until last week, and then we had a positive detected. So I just wanted to highlight that our goal is to engage with our community and let people know what we are doing, because we are safeguarding animal health and human health and the environment, and we are the first block out there, right? So we need support. We are only 10% state support and another about 13% supported for maintenance and operations for the last 10 years. So our funding is really fee dependent, and fee is economy plays a vital role. So please support the VDL if you speak to your legislatures and the stakeholders for funding for the VDL. An opportunity that we are trying to apply for funding is unless a federal congressionally directed spending request. This is something which we are trying through the US senators. They usually put out every year priorities for funding. And so we have been trying to submit it through Senator Klobuchar's office. We are seeking $2.25 million that will help us fund for 3 things. One is $150,000 to get a digital scanner so that we can be able to be relevant and utilize, offer good histopathology services. Second is looking for $1 million for our new LIMS system, a lab information management software. It is very critical that we do the testing and report it and message it to our Fed partners and to the state partners. Our current program is in-house built and it has been with us for forever. It's a great program, but it's vulnerable. And there is really not a single product that is good in the market that covers everything. But if we do get funding through this mechanism, either we will try to make our current system more robust or ask for a new LIMS in parallel as we work with the current LIMS. And lastly, the real-time PCR instrument, that is our workhorse. That is a piece of equipment that we use on a daily basis for do high-pad testing or FMD or CSF. And those are also getting outdated in the next couple of years. The company, there is one sole vendor, which is Thermo Fisher Scientific, and they are going to discontinue the model that we have. So in the next 3 years, if we don't have that model with us, we have to switch to another model, and each equipment is $50,000. So we're asking for $1 million for that. Dr. Hughes mentioned about the opportunities with funding for from the USDA, which is called as HiPath AI Poultry Innovation Grant Challenge, and this is due May 19th. So from the college and from the VDL, we will try to submit proposals. It is competitive funding. We'll reach out to our poultry stakeholders in the state because this is an opportunity for us to either focus on 3 areas: poultry vaccine development, therapeutics for HiPath AI, as well as doing research to find out how this virus mutates and whether we have the same strain or other strains circulating. So again, it's competitive funding. The whole country will apply because there is $100 million in that, and they will fund up to $2 million per project. So they may want to fund up to 50 projects, and there are 50 states. So we don't know what the chances are, but we will try to apply for that funding. Last but not the least, we are trying to do a lot of outreach activities. So since we met last in fall, we were at the Minnesota Pork Congress in Mankato. And then our faculty were at the American Association of Swine Veterinarian Swine Conference. Last weekend, we were at the Swine Producer Meet, which was done by Swine Vet Center. And so all of these are swine conferences. And then we will be participating in the PEAK conference, which is Poultry Production Expo, and North Central Avian Disease Conference happening next week, actually. And I've mentioned about a survey that I'm trying to do. I kind of work with our group to develop an instrument because, we have a shortage of veterinarians, but we definitely have a shortage of specialized veterinarians who work in the laboratories. And on an average, it takes a couple of years to recruit veterinarians in those roles as pathologists and all. So by doing this survey, we will know what is in the pipeline as far as pathologists, microbiologists, toxicologists, clinical pathologists, parasitologists across the 60 labs in the country. That information will allow us to go to USDA and ask them some way of funding, like how they gave the American Rescue Planning money. It is the need of the hour that we need more funding to develop that specialist workforce pipeline. And so we would like to use that data for that. With that, any questions? I have a few slides that I just put data together, which we can share with Erin and we can send it out, but just showing numbers and I don't know whether we have a few minutes or I can stop at that point. If you're running late, I don't need to go into the depth.
Could you send it out?
Yes, I will
Or
send it
have
out.
Erin send it?
Sure. And this is basically going to show poultry, cats, dogs, cattle, and what we have seen in the last 3 years in Minnesota. So I'll do that. Thank you.
Any questions? Okay, thank you for your update.
Thank you. Oh, sure. Sure. So I'll try my best to cover. If Dean Molgaard could do that, it would have been great. So I'll probably read out the slides, and I do have an extra note that she has emailed me as well. Unfortunately, the thing is spinning for a long time. So and there's a lot of going on campus today. So she is tied up on site on campus. So our first cohort of the South Dakota State University's 2+2 student program will be graduating this May. For those who are not aware of it, this is the first graduating batch. And so we are very proud of that. If you are not aware about this program, please let me know. If you need some more information, we can share that. There's the white coat ceremony. Third year DVM students will mark the start of the clinical year during the April 21st ceremony. This happens every year, so this is on April 21st. If you have any family members or others who are budding veterinarians at the college, maybe you could join on April 21st for the white coat ceremony. This is really exciting. The Spectrum of Care Clinic, which just got approved. So this is a $5 million grant funding from the Stanton Foundation, and it paves the way for a new Spectrum of Care educational facility and clinic. This is going to be next to our small animal hospital, and so this will allow for affordable care. So that is going to be something. Ohio State has got funding from this foundation, and our College of Veterinary Medicine has got funding. This is the Spectrum of Care is the ability to provide profitable treatment for clients with limited financial resources, but has some ability to pay, which enhances accessibility to quality care. And the model is that the students will be trained in multiple approaches to care, including a range of diagnostic techniques, clinical procedures, and post-visit care protocols. It will also allow it differs from discounted or sliding scale pricing, subsidized care, or other approaches that require philanthropic support. That is community medicine. So community medicine is different than Spectrum of Care. I was at this St. Paul campus strategic planning yesterday, and this is what Dean has. So we have a new president, President Cunningham, and one of our initiatives is to make sure that the St. Paul campus strategic planning happens. And the task force has been put together. They will identify key decisions necessary in the next 3 to 5 years to shape the campus's future. Maroon, gold, and bold, the University of Minnesota's vision for our state, nation, and world. And I think with that, I just had one more comment from Dean that she wanted to make sure I talk about. It's like, as you are all well aware, the government budgets and funding seem to be in a state of constant flux. One bit of disappointing news we have received is that the Minnesota veterinary loan repayment could be cut from the state budget. So the veterinary loan repayment could be cut from the state budget. More than 40 veterinarians have benefited from this program since its inception in 2018. Each year, the Minnesota legislature provides $375,000 for rural veterinarian loan repayment program. And we are working very hard to see this continue. We launched an action alert, and as a result, students, faculty, staff, and alumni sent 390 emails to the governor and state legislatures urging them to preserve this critical program. However, I learned this weekend that there is this perception that the money isn't being spent, when in fact it is being encumbered to be paid out over the 5 years as the program dictates. So help us voice this request. That's all we had from the dean's office. So Any questions I can relate to her or I can answer? Oh, I didn't see that there was this is more description. This shows more than $75,000 of provided in funds under the loan repayment. As I mentioned, 40 veterinarians have benefited so far and currently fighting to keep it in the state budget. Health sciences at UMN, this is the goal to ensure all ministers have access to exceptional health care. My apologies, I did not see that there was a couple of more slides. So the idea about this health science plan is to expand access by reducing health care workforce shortages worldwide, statewide. It is also a problem worldwide as well. Reduce health inequalities by expanding partnerships to rural and other underserved communities, improve health quality close to home, and transform health outcomes through innovation, prevention, treatment, and care models. So under this health sciences plan, the goal is to increase the capacity of our DVM class. And so that is one of the multiple things that this health science plan is being focused at. If I could relay anything to the dean, let me know. Any questions?
Hey, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, good morning, everyone. I'm Michelle Medina, Assistant Director of Government Relations for the Department of Ag and also the Board of Animal Health. So I'm gonna do a quick ledge update here. We'll try to keep within my 10 minutes. We're on time, so I'm gonna try to keep us on time. So big thing we're talking about this year is budget. As you know, this is a budgeting year. We started the session on January, I believe 14th was the day. We should adjourn by May 19th, but the last day to actually meet is May 18th. So it's actually one less day in that. So we're already about halfway through the session. So in the governor's original budget, he had an operating adjustment for the board of $121,000 in fiscal year 26 and $246,000 per year ongoing. So a slight increase to the agency. And then, so that was the first budget sent out. That was after the November forecast. And then he sends a revised budget out that is after the February forecast. So the February forecast isn't looking as good as the November forecast. It's a little bit more on the negative side. So we're seeing that there's a $456 million surplus in the binding for 26 and 27, but there's about a $6 billion shortfall in 28-29. So that means in the tails, we're going to be short on the budget. So for the revised budget, there was nothing directly for the Board of Animal Health in the revised budget, but there was an increase of $4 million when the prices are shut down, we depop those animals because there was nowhere for them to go and they couldn't fit through to get processed. So that account's pretty important to the agency. The asks for the governor's budget is 4 million. Again, this is a recommendation. This does not mean that it's a done deal. So we will see kind of how that works as they work on the negotiations between the committees. So usually what happens when you're going to negotiations to do budgets, the House and Senate will agree on joint targets. So targets is the amount of money that each committee jurisdiction can spend. So in agriculture, with agriculture, broadband, and
Veterans.
and veterans. In the Senate, but veterans is a separate committee in the House, so it's a little bit more, the subcommittee. So I haven't saw the Senate GOP numbers yet, but the Senate DFL did send out numbers and the House sent out numbers. So again, usually you have just one target that both House and Senate work on. This year we have a DFL target, we have a House target, and I think we'll have a DFL Senate target or a GOP Senate target. So two separate targets in the Senate, which will make things a little bit more complicated, I'll say. So for the Senate DFL, their target for ag for fiscal year 26-27 is a negative $313,000. In the tails 28-29, they have a $2.928 million target, so an increase in the tails. And then the House, from what I understood, they had a $17 million target each biennium or ag. So again, the board's budget is within the ag budget, within the Department of Ag. So those are pretty different numbers. So there will be quite a bit of negotiations and all kind of going on a conference committee. So I think we'll see this week some more budget bills coming out to be discussed. I know we're gonna hear the governor's budget bill tomorrow in House Ag, and then I believe we'll see the Senate chair's budget bill come out tomorrow afternoon as well. Well, maybe come out today. So when the bills and when the targets are so far apart, they have to go to conference committee and then reconcile the bills so they have the same amounts in each bill. So we will see what happens, but again, a negative 313 and a 17 million are very different targets. And it's usually not this way, so it's gonna, I don't know what's gonna happen, to be honest. It's a very different scenario than we've had. This has been a very different year as well. Just a reminder to the seat in the House for 40B was also filled by David Gottfried, and he is a DFL, so that puts the House back at 67. And then in the Senate, you guys saw that Senator Eichhorn has resigned, and so now they are at a 34 Democrat, 32 Republican. So the DFL still has a 1-seat majority, but they're tied in the House, so there's more bipartisanship required to get any bills passed. It's the required majority. So it's just very different kind of setting. So then we're coming up here on deadlines, and the first and second deadline are April 4th, so this Friday at 5 p.m. And the committees must act favorably on bills in the House of Origin. And then they must also act favorably on bills or companions of bills that met the first deadline in the other body. So we'll see a lot of bills coming through. And then the third deadline is April 11th, so next Friday. And that one is where committees must act favorably on major appropriation or finance bills. So our bill follows under that. So then the one other thing is I want to mention is that we have the Easter Passover recess. That is going to be April 11th at noon. So next Friday at noon through Monday, April 21st at noon. So we'll have about a 10-day recess. Within the recess, there will not be any official business. There will not be any meetings, no hearings, any of that. So we'll be on a break for that time. Okay, and then I'm glad to hear what I forgot the lower payment one, but that is a pretty big one. That is, I will say, a priority for Commissioner Peterson to work on that. So I think that's one we have worked on. It's $750 per year. They also took out the $100,000 per biennium for the ag educators. That also was a cut that got taken in higher end with the governor's revised budget. So those two we're just watching as well. Okay, any questions on budget numbers? I know we're going to budget later with Melissa. She'll hit some of those a little bit more, but any questions on that? Others will kind of jump into a couple bills here that we're just tracking that impacts to the board. Okay, so I have quite a few bills. I'm not going to go through all of them, but I'll kind of hit the ones that we're kind of following a little bit closer. So Rep Anderson or Chair Anderson in the House has House File 979. And that's an open appropriation for the Board of Animal Health. It's probably a vehicle bill. So there's no money for that per se. He also has House File 1101, which would add money to the Ag and Mercy account. That'd be 1.5 million to that account. Again, that's with the Department of Ag, but we partner with the board and the INT on that work. And then Rep Freiberg has House File 1296. There's also companion in the Senate on this one. It was not heard yet in the House. But this would modify the classification of commercial dog cat breeder data and then require the board to post this on their website, which had a pretty big fiscal note. So I'll talk about that when we get to the Senate bill. And then there's House File 1298. This is actually in DNR statute, but it's about authorizing the taking of feral swine causing damage. The main concern with this one is that it doesn't require whoever hunted the animal to submit it for testing. If there's ever feral swine, they need to be tested for disease. And so that's a big concern with this one, is that it would not need to be submitted for testing. So one we're watching. Burkeville also has House File 1503. This is to establish a program for grants to prevent the spread of avian influenza and appropriates money. This is for poultry, so looking at lasers, air cannons, different things to keep animals away from farms. I'm not gonna go through all the bills, but there's a bunch of different bills about Survey. So there's some to remove the recording of the title, there's some to remove the fencing requirements, there's some that move white-tailed deer back to the Board of Animal Health. There's a wide variety of those. There's also a couple to allow import of cervids. So there's just a bunch of kind of cervid bills that we're watching. And then House File 1704, again, Chair Anderson's carrying this bill. This is I'll say the GOP budget bill in the House, and so it has $200,000 in fiscal year 26-27 for the board for egg emergency preparedness and response, and a $356,000 increase to maintain current service levels for the board. So that is a bigger increase as well. And then Rep. Hansen has House File 2012. And this would modify the Board of Animal Health, so it would increase the board to 11 members, 2 at large, including 1 tribal member and 8 regional members. And then the governor would appoint the state vet and the board director. So we saw this one before, it's a very similar one. I do not believe this has had a hearing yet. And then House File 2155, this is an agency policy bill. This one just repeals the rabies proclamation and the livestock scale provisions around brands, as these are just outdated statutes that we don't enforce anymore. So we're just looking to get those removed. So it's being carried by the Department of Ag, but includes board provisions. Hansen also has this in another bill, it's House File 2281. And then House File 2446 by Chair Anderson is the governor's budget bill. So that will be being heard tomorrow, and that has the governor's recommendations for the increase to the board. And then also Chair Hansen has House File 2490. This is what established the Companion Animal Board. This would transfer some duties from the Board of Animal Health. It also has a pretty big fiscal note of $2.85 million in fiscal year 26 and $3.06 million in fiscal year 27. So another one we're watching, it has not been heard yet in the House. Chair Hansen also has House File 2541, which would abolish the Board of Animal Health and transfer its duties to the Department of Ag, establishing the Animal Health Advisory Council, recurring report rulemaking. So this would move the board under the Department of Ag, with the commissioner appointing the 8 board members to the Animal Health Advisory Council, and then transfer those duties to MDA. So it would essentially remove the board and put them under the Department of Ag. This one has also not been heard yet. And then just flagging one kind of for awareness, House File 2627 by Rep. Norris. It prohibits pet shops from selling cats and dogs. So again, not quite our jurisdiction, but just one that we're tracking. And then I'll jump quick to a couple Senate bills. Again, there's a lot of Senate bills for cervids and fencing. Also importing. And then, so House Senate File 1029 by Senator Westland. That is the one that modifies the classification of commercial dog and cat breeder data. That one was heard in Senate Ag. It was amended that took off some requirements that require us to make them post publicly. But making this data public, we're neutral on the bill. But if the data is public, that opens up data requests, which would cause an increase in cost to the agency. So just recognizing there would be a fiscal cost. Even with the changes they had made to try to reduce the fiscal cost. And then Senate File 1540, Senator Putnam and Westrom introduced. This is an open appropriation to the Board of Animal Health, also possibly a vehicle bill. All right, there's a lot of bills this session. We're over like 3,000 bills I think in each body. And all these bills will be live next session as well. So we'll see all these bills plus more into the next session. And then also Senate File 2415 with Senator Dibble. This would again establish the Companion Animal Board. And then Senate File 2474 by Senator Hoffman. This again is kind of to Hansen's bill that would modify the Board of Animal Health membership. And then Senator Putnam also has Senate File 2611, which includes deleting those obsolete rules for the board, so the obsolete statutes, excuse me, so the rabies proclamation and using the brand as official ID. So those are the main bills that we're tracking. I think there's probably a couple more I might have missed. Again, there's a lot of bills. A lot have not heard hearings, and because we're already going to the person's like a deadline, there's been not much time to have these bills act on favorably in each committee. So we'll kind of see what gets through and what gets heard yet this next week. But having a holiday on Monday, we're also off on Eid break on Monday, and so we didn't meet on Monday. House and Senate meet on Monday and Wednesday, so we just had this Wednesday to meet. But I believe the Senate and committee will be meeting on Friday as well, so another hearing on Friday. So that is what I have. Any questions?
Well, as a director on the Board of Animal Health, it almost feels like a lot of these things, when there's hearings or something, I feel like some of us should be going there, but we're not sure when or what or how to prepare. We ask this question too.
Yeah, so I will say as private citizens, you're always welcome to go and to go and testify. I think if we're going to testify on behalf of the board, then we should work with the state vet to decide who and what and kind of what that messaging is. So we can definitely talk through that, but you're always welcome to come. You're a private citizen, you can do, right, come and do whatever you want to testify on your own behalf at any time. But that's definitely something we can work on, and I can do a better job of sending out emails when these bills are up in hearings. And even there's always remote options to watch as well, and in some cases you can also testify remotely. So there are options. We can definitely touch base on that.
So maybe between Michelle and Brian, can you just briefly talk about when you both have testified? I mean, because you both have done it more than once this session already. So maybe just to kind of touch on Dr. Hawkins' points.
Yeah, I think there's some procedure there that a lot of these bills are introduced. That doesn't mean they're going anywhere. So typically what happened, I'll let Michelle fill in the gaps on me, but typically what happens is we're not necessarily called to testify. We're called to be there to answer questions. So the author or sponsor of the bill will present it, and then the committee members get a chance to ask questions. Sometimes they ask, is there someone from the agency to come up and answer some questions? Sometimes they don't. So it really depends. But those bills haven't gotten to the point where they're really getting debated heavily. I mean, the expanding the board, I mean, they've been introduced, but it hasn't gotten to the point where they're looking for testifiers. But when it gets to that point, then Michelle usually gives me kind of a list of, this is what's coming up. Hey, can Steve be there? We've got some companion animal stuff to work through. So, but.
Yeah, so we really only send them to testify publicly on bills that are part of the governor's budget or our agency directives. So if there's a bill that like the obsolete statutes, that is one that we're carrying, and so we want to be on the record saying that we support it. But if it's not our bill, we don't generally testify because it's just not also our place necessarily. And then whenever we have technical bills up or our bills that would affect the agency, I do try to bring our subject matter experts so that if there are questions, we just answer them then and there. We don't have to come back later to follow with an email or explain it. So I usually try to make sure I have board staff there because I can usually explain some of this. I know enough to be dangerous, but there's sometimes questions that I just can't answer and just don't understand the programs just like our staff do. So I do bring in staff to bring in experts at every possibility, which can be hard though, because I make them come in quite often and most of the time they just sit there and don't actually have to testify. Or they ask the department to testify instead. And so, yeah, it just depends.
And we get a lot of work done behind the scenes too. So Michelle will set up meetings with the sponsor so we can kind of give our overview or our take on it. You know, we try to remain neutral, but this is what the effect will be. All that being said, if some of these bills that she just talked about, like expanding the board, I think that deserves some input from our board members to. So we don't want to, or we do. But it's not really to that point yet. I defer to Michelle to let me know when that is going to happen, just to give you a heads up. But
yeah, and usually before bills, once they're scheduled for a hearing, if there's a bill we have concerns on, or we feel like we should get some feedback to the author, we will do that and we'll try to set a meeting or send an email at least. we never want to surprise bill authors in committee that have concerns or are not okay with their bill. We really try to be very upfront and honest right away. Once we know what's scheduled, that we're gonna have concerns, we tell them what they are so that they're not surprised in committee, and we're always willing to work with authors on the bills to make sure they work for everyone. So
The committee chairs are really good about keeping Michelle in the loop too about what the agenda is for the next hearing. So then she gets the opportunity to say, this is our view on that particular bill, or this is a concern, or this doesn't have any concern. So,
yeah, in general, the board is neutral on most things. I think the one example is the data for companion animals. If that database is public, that's fine. We have no position on that. But it would lead to increased costs. And so that's where we need to have the increased funding to pay for that increased work. So that's where it might appear that we're, not for it, but it's really just with so many federal funding concerns and unknowns, we need to have sufficient budgets, especially now with all the impending diseases that Dr. Hoefs helps us all stay awake at night with. We really just need to make sure that we're fully funded and able to respond and not burn our staff out, because to his point, this is endemic. If it's not going away, this is going to be, a full-time ongoing thing. And so we need to, be fully staffed to fully functioning, because we're in charge of the health of all animals, all domestic animals in the state. With about $6.5 million budget per year, we're a pretty small agency. That's general fund from the state. We're a pretty small agency, and so every penny counts. And we're ag and farmers, and we always make it work. And we've made it work, but there comes a point where we just need more funding to really be successful and effective in our work.
and so we're getting to the point in the session where, it's been crazy up to this point, and now it gets crazier. So it's kind of fast and furious, and we won't have as much notice on when things are coming up, or sometimes even what committees they're in. Sometimes they'll jump to a different committee to discuss the finance piece of it. So it's a little bit fly by the seat of your pants once we get to this part of the session. But all that being said, if we get to the point where some of these board specific bills, so restructuring the board of directors, restructuring the board itself, absolutely, that as much notice as we can give you, we will, just at the very least, so you know what's going on, but to testify as well or answer questions. Because usually they will, the chair of the committee will ask, are there any public members that would like to testify? So even if you haven't been invited, you still have the opportunity to voice an opinion.
Yeah, and I always schedule too, if we're gonna testify on the record, I schedule that with the committee administration as well. And so if we're gonna testify on the record, I will do that ahead of time to make sure that we have time to testify.
I get the impression that some of these bills are probably running out of time to be heard this session anyway. There's something to keep track of for next session, just because they're a bit of a heavy lift to accomplish, both financially and just to kind of sort out all the details. So it's probably more of a warning for what's to come for next year. But
yeah, and I think too, the interim, we could also try to meet with some of these bill authors and just talk through their bills with them and voice our concerns in that. So these bills are all still alive through next session, so we have time to work on them.
They are kind of shocking though when Michelle drops another one. Did you see this? So
yeah, I gotta be more creative, I think. They're just a little. But yeah, people can draft, legislators can draft bills on anything. So you'll see there's a really wide gamut of bills. Again, there's over, I think, 3,000 in each body already this session, and I'm sure there's still gonna be more coming. So
there's one on the state constellation.
Oh yes, there's
the Little Dipper.
State fossil is the giant river. There's a state song. I include fun ones. I do updates every Friday with staff, so I include some fun ones because it can't all be just really good reference. So we get a little fun, couple tidbits in there. Okay, sorry, I'm over time.
Any last minute question for Michelle? Okay. Thank you, Michelle. Thanks. Yeah, sorry, you ready?
Yeah. While Erin is sharing my slide deck, I did bring some Defend the Flock calendars if folks want them. You want 3?
Yeah, I sent away to get 5 of them and they didn't.
Oh, they didn't show up?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry.
As a veterinarian, you get this thing in the mail
Yeah.
that says, sign up and get 5 of these, and they never showed up, so now the people I promised them she will get.
Yeah. I'm glad I just snagged them this morning, kind of randomly. But if it's not enough and folks want some, let me know. I'll take your address and get you some sent. They're really popular and, I'm happy we were able to still provide them this year, you know, whether we'll have them next year is always a surprise. I also wanted to mention, so Monday is a holiday. It's not quite a federal holiday yet, but I wanted to invite you guys to celebrate it if you want to. It's my birthday. So, you know, those of you who will be at North Central, I'll be there. So anyway, thank you, board, as usual, for inviting me. And for celebrating my birthday on Monday. No, I'm joking. So this morning I wanted to talk a little bit, there's been a lot of focus on the biosecurity programs that the Secretary Rollins has rolled out, as Dr. Hoefs mentioned earlier. And so I wanted to talk about it. This particular presentation, if you attended the biosecurity webinar, I think it was, I'm losing track of time because I just got back from Utah for a week with my kids. And so, but it was either a week or 2 or more ago, Dr. Rochette gave this presentation. So for those of you who have seen it, I apologize, but I wanted to make sure to give some time to it because it's kind of a popular topic for us. So we touched on the current situation a little bit. You know, this is the national situation since February 2022. We've had all states affected and 1 affected territory. Dr. Hoefs touched on this, that 77% of all birds affected have been egg layers. That's where that focus from the secretary came from. But in Minnesota especially, we know that 12% commercial turkey. And so that really impacts us greatly. And then Dr. Hoefs touched on this a little bit as well, this kind of ebb and flow. So this is the epi curve, and you see our, you know, 1-year mark, 2-year mark, 3-year mark, and you see there's some cyclical movement to it. But, you know, even at the 3-year mark, I mean, it's not quite as, it's, to me, it looks a little bit more even as what he was saying. So we don't call it endemic, but I think we also agree that, you know, we're not sure when we'll get from under it. And so what we do know is, you know, 82% of all the detections are consistent with wild bird introductions, and that's based on the genomics. And then those genomics also lets us know that 18% are consistent with farm to farm transmission. Very different from the 2015 outbreak, where the bulk of that outbreak was farm to farm. APHIS did a case control study of both layers and commercial turkey and found that biosecurity practices are still helpful. And that's where all these biosecurity, you know, rules and programs are coming from, was these case control studies that recognize that the most impactful measures include keeping rodents away from feed sources and requiring farm personnel to change clothes and shoes and cleaning and disinfecting shared vehicles and equipment. And so those were some of the big ones, along with some other biosecurity measures that producers can take. And so that brings us to this biosecurity assessments and incentives program. And so then incentives are intended to address these biosecurity gaps on commercial farms, and then enhance the measures that would help those farms. There's a cost share for USDA up to 75%, and that 75% is a lifetime amount. The specific amounts or categories are yet to be published, so we don't know what that looks like. And then the reimbursements would be made after the audits or assessments. and after key measures are addressed. So those remediations are done, and then the producers can turn in receipts and costs to then get reimbursed. I really like this slide because as we talk about audits and assessments and while, you know, it gets kind of jumbled. And so Dr. Hayes talked about the biosecurity compliance audit program. So audit, if you hear audit, it means it's required. So if you're, and it's required for indemnity. So someone could, you know, not do an audit, but then they would not be eligible for indemnity in the future. And so, so the BCAP, we love our acronyms, is required for commercial premises intending to move poultry into a buffer zone or control area. And it's required for previously infected premises to provide indemnity prior to restocking or indemnity eligibility prior to restocking. And so as Dr. Voss mentioned, in Minnesota, we've done 3 of those. Those have been done across the country so far. That came into place December 31st. It's an interim rule. The comment period is still open. Yeah. And so then the next one is this biosecurity incentive focused assessment. And so when you see assessment, whether it's the wildlife biosecurity assessment or the biosecurity incentive focused assessment, or we've been referring to that as BIFA, is voluntary. And so it really opened up for those producers. And we kind of gotten that question on our EDMC for the BCAP. It was like, well, what if we want a BCAP audit and we're not in a control area? Well, the resources to do that with state and federal Minnesota is just like, whoa. But the secretary did roll out this separate program. It does use the same BCAP audit tool. And so you have that it adds to some of the confusion between the 3 programs, but they are connected in that way. And so we're using that voluntary assessment for premises outside of a control area, and it evaluates structural and operational biosecurity measures, which the BCAP does as well. And then you have the wildlife biosecurity assessment. Minnesota was a part of the pilot states for those wildlife biosecurity assessments in the past. And so those are just being kind of revved up and made more available at no cost to producers. And producers who do that assessment also are eligible for funding to correct those biosecurity gaps. So this really, I mean, it talks about, you know, with BCAP or BIFA, these assessments and audits review the biosecurity documentation, maintenance of the perimeter buffer area or line of separation, how you monitor your mortality, any wildlife mitigation. And so it's an assessment that's meant to be comprehensive. So for the restocking, it's in person, but if you're in a control area, it can be virtual. The BIFA, that biosecurity incentive focus assessment program, is completely virtual. And then the wildlife biosecurity assessment with wildlife services is in person, and it's actually over weeks or months. And I thought I might have had a slide about that. So how does a producer request the assessment? For the mandatory audits, the required audits, if you think audit, think required, think regular process. And so we work with the state. That's going to go through the process that it's gone through EMERS permitting, however we do that, that stays the same. For the voluntary assessments, both for the wildlife for the wildlife biosecurity assessments and the biosecurity incentive focused assessments, producer would email this poultry.biosecurity@USDA or call that number with specific information. And I handed out some one pagers, and we have some more up here if people are interested. And that would be routed to the state that those assessments are requested in. And so the state vet will have, will know what assessments are being requested and will be a part of that process. Not to do it, but just to have visual, know what's going on. So you're not blindsided and find out it's 50 assessments that's happening in your state. So after they request an assessment, after the producer requests an assessment, we're targeting scheduling within 2 to 4 weeks. And then I mentioned this, that structural or operational assessments may be conducted virtually. And then, yeah, the wildlife assessments are multi-phased and span several weeks to months. And then after the assessments are completed, producers can submit a claim for reimbursement. So we talked a little bit about that. One thing that, and I can't remember the new acronym for it, which is another acronym, but there is room in the program for producers who don't have any remediations. And so there was some worry that, you know, I don't get to kind of take part in this if my biosecurity is pretty solid already. So there's another program where a producer can write up a proposal for additional, like maybe you're adding things to your biosecurity program that's already doing well. So that's an option as well. They didn't want to leave out producers who may, or companies that may be already doing a really good job. That's it. One thing I didn't mention is that another difference for, so BCAP as of now is state and federal, which works really well for us because that's how we do, how we work in Minnesota with our HPI response. The BIFA program, because it's the Secretary's priority, they brought in a cohort of people from different parts of USDA to do those assessments. We still have some control on whether local USDA staff can do those assessments, but we do have access to people across the country who are able to do those assessments because we just don't know how popular they're going to be. But it is a USDA focused program as of now. I mean, you know, things are changing, and but that's one question I think folks have had. But that's it. And no fruit have been thrown, so that yeah.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
He's remote.
Hi, all. This is Stacy Holzbauer from MDH. Can you hear me?
We can hear you, Stacy.
Okay, great. I apologize that I'm not able to be there today, but just wanted to give everyone some quick updates. So first, starting with the MDH response to H5N1. Since we last met in April, the human case count is now up to 70. Or sorry, when we met in February, but there haven't been any new cases since February. So those human cases, 24 of them have been associated with poultry farm or depopulation efforts. 2 have been associated with backyard poultry flock exposure, including 1 death in Louisiana, and 41 cases have been associated with positive dairy cattle exposure. There have been 3 cases, human cases, who have been found through routine influenza surveillance. However, their actual exposures to infected animals remains unknown. So here at MDH, since this virus first appeared in 2022, we've had 2,457 human exposures reported to MDH, including 2,300 poultry exposures, 129 dairy exposures, and 24 companion animal exposures. We currently have 6 people in monitoring associated with the recent positive dairy farm. We've tested 82 people, and there have been no human detections of H5N1 here in Minnesota. We continue to have PPE available for folks who are working in industries that may be affected by this virus, and we've had 246 requests for PPE, which 70% of them are coming from the dairy industry. Wanted to give you a little update on the vaccine outreach. We have 2 personnel who have been hired to work with local public health to promote seasonal influenza vaccine among farm workers in rural areas. Thus far, they've sponsored 11 vaccination clinics working with local public health, local public health partners with over 250 people receiving influenza vaccinations. We've had 4 farms who have been willing to host mobile vaccination clinics, and there are 8 additional events that are pending. And then also wanted to share some recent publications that have been published on the human effects of this virus. First, in the CDC's Morbidity and Mortality Weekly Report in February, there was a summary of 2 indoor domestic cats that were owned by dairy workers in Michigan. And these cats did become ill with H5N1. One of the cat owners worked on a positive dairy farm, and the other cat owner was someone who was a milk hauler. 5 household members and 24 veterinary staff were exposed to these positive cats, and they were indoor only cats, no outdoor exposure. No human infections were detected, and based on the investigations, these cats were likely exposed from contaminated clothing that the workers brought home. And so this is just another potential risk for animals and people, and just highlights the ease that this virus can have when moving around. And then also wanted to share a recent publication of the California human infections. And so our colleagues from the California Department of Health wrote a summary of their 38 positive people. 37 of those folks were exposed to infected dairy cattle on 29 infected farms. The vast majority of these people who were infected worked either in the parlor as milkers or in the hospital pens. And when looking at the PPE that they were wearing, 54% of them reported wearing eye protection. However, none reported wearing any masks. And so it gives us a little more information on the workers on these farms who are at most risk, and where we really want to concentrate our efforts for people to wear appropriate PPE. There was also 1 child who was detected through routine influenza surveillance who had an unknown exposure, and further investigation showed no human-to-human transmission within that household or any other infections, and so that exposure of that child remains unknown. All of these people had mild illness, with conjunctivitis being the main symptom that was seen, and there were no hospitalizations. And then I wanted to switch gears and just give a little update on a project that we're doing related to carbapenem-resistant enterobacterialis, or CRE. And so kind of stepping back, when we look at antimicrobial resistance, it's something that happens when a pathogen defeats the antibiotics that were given to the host to treat the infection. And so this impacts people, animals, and environment. And antimicrobial resistance can spread through healthcare facilities, both human and animal communities, animal populations, and natural environments. And so looking specifically at carbapenem-resistant enterobacterialis, carbapenems are a class of antibiotics that is commonly used in human healthcare for multi-drug resistant infections. Imipenem or meropenem are the main antimicrobials that we're looking at, and they're often seen on antimicrobial susceptibility panels, including those in veterinary medicine as well. This class of antibiotics is rarely used in veterinary medicine, and if it is used, it's a last line of antibiotics that we treat some multi-drug resistant infections. And so the bugs are gram-negative bacteria, and it's an actual order. So it includes multiple bacteria, including E. coli, Klebsiella, and Enterobacter species. These are common causes of infections, both in human and animal hospitals and also in the community. And some of these bacteria can produce carbapenemases, which is essentially a type of enzyme that can break down the antibiotic structure, making them ineffective. And carbapenemases can also be then characterized by the specific action that they use to break down the antibiotic. And so who you live with can affect your bacterial flora or your microbiomes. And research has shown that couples in households with dogs have more similar microbiomes than those who are living alone because of the additional shared microbial sources. So having a dog or a pet in the household adds to bacterial diversity. And several culture-based studies have demonstrated that shared gut and skin bacteria can be shared also between humans and their pets. And so this adds another layer of potential sharing of CREs as well. And so this is one of the reasons that we care about CREs in companion animals. Resistant infections have already been demonstrated in animal populations and in healthcare, but in veterinary medicine, cultures and sensitivities are not often performed, and animals are often receiving broad-spectrum antimicrobials rather than targeted therapy. And there's also a risk of zoonotic antimicrobial resistance transmission within the homes. And also in healthcare clinics when therapy animals are brought in and within the community. And so we've seen reports of CREs that have really begun to explode in the veterinary literature over the past 5 years or so. And this just points to the need for us to really understand the spread and sources of organisms in companion animals. And so there have been multiple reports of CRE-positive dogs and cats in the United States that have been published in the peer-reviewed literature or reported to public health. We had a large outbreak associated with a rescue facility in another state that affected several of the veterinary clinics here in Minnesota. And while the overall incidence in the U.S. is really unknown, there's a growing concern in public health and veterinary medicine about CRE colonization and infection in animals. And so similar to what we see in human healthcare, the risk is most highest in referral facilities because they are seeing patients that need more care and usually more medication as well. However, unlike human healthcare, veterinary facilities have unique risks, which include elimination areas used by all patients and reuse of medical equipment and supplies. And so this brings us to a project that we have been doing here at the Minnesota Department of Health in collaboration with the University of Pennsylvania School of Public Medicine, of Veterinary Medicine. And the goal is to really investigate how CREs arise, investigate how they're spread, and identify populations of people and pets that are most at risk. And just this week, there was a publication looking at one of the first projects of looking at 15 hospitals in the Philadelphia area and collecting environmental samples. And over 40% of those veterinary hospitals had evidence of environmental contamination with these resistant organisms, and they were most likely isolated on the sinks, the floors, and the cages. And they also showed the presence of a closely genetically related strain of organisms across multiple facilities that suggested essentially the organisms followed the referral network of these different hospitals, which showed that colonized and infected animals could be transmitting and moving these organisms between veterinary hospitals. And so so there are resources that are available for pet owners, veterinarians, and public health practitioners regarding CRE and the risks to animals that are found here. And we also have posters that are available to MDH that highlight the infection control practices and awareness needed to prevent these organisms. And so, excuse me, we're always happy to help distribute those as well. And with that, I just wanted to end to let you all know that today is a tough day here at the Department of Health. We are announcing that we are laying off 233 people, including 176 employees and 57 contractors. And we are also seeing major restructuring of our federal partners within the health and the HHS agencies as well. And so what this means for the future of our work remains to be unknown, but we'll be sure to update people as we move forward. And that is all I have.
Are there any questions for Stacy? Stacy, there's no questions here, but know that we're thinking about all of you today. So thank you for your update.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Melissa, we're ready for you.
All right, well, the last time I gave a budget update was, I think it was the December 12th meeting. And I tell you what, it wasn't as bleak as I feel today. I do feel better as we'll get through this. I'm gonna go through a timeline, but I wanted to start with this slide. This was a slide that I had started with at my December meeting. And one thing that you'll notice right away is that the majority of our board budget is for salary. Two of them are at 11%. That's for Minnesota IT. We don't really get to determine what those IT costs look like. We try to be responsible stewards and, expend what is needed. There's a lot of technology that allows us to do our jobs. And so that cost is a little bit hard to dwindle down. You'll notice that other 11% is our professional technical services. So that's going to be all of our outside vendors, contractors, and where our contracts were the U of M and testing, the University of Wisconsin, and a few other contracts. And then you'll notice that our travel and fleet is about 2%. And then space rentals and utilities and kind of other things are under that 4%. So, you know, at the last December meeting, we had talked about, we recognize that there's going to be more expenses with salary, IT. And we were kind of looking at ways to cut, but when you're looking at such a small fraction, where do you cut from, right? I mean, the salary being the biggest piece. The only way to decrease salary is to decrease people, right? So just to put this kind of visual picture in here as I go through this next timeline. So like I said, December board meeting, it's green. I kind of color coded this to my feeling because I wasn't feeling bleak at that time. The end of January or end of December, beginning of January, still feeling good. USDA put out a few Q&A live sessions talking about some of our cooperative agreements, specifically traceability and umbrella. Things were looking great during those Q&As, kind of got some updates on kind of what those programs would look like. We were told funding was going to remain stable. And then we see the beginning of February, kind of that administration change over in Washington. And that's where a lot of those uncertainties came in. A lot of agencies, a lot of states kind of feeling those waves of just uncertainty among what federal funding for a lot of folks would look like. We started having conversations immediately with Brian, the assistant directors, to discuss if we need to pull back, how do we do that? And I guess with the uncertainty came not knowing if we were going to get new cooperative agreements, and that's a source of federal funding that we get through USDA. And we had new agreements slated to start as of April 1st. But with that kind of federal freeze and hold on stuff, USDA was relaying to us that at the time they didn't know if and when new cooperative agreements were going to go out, which was what put me in the red, right? Because that means that I have to figure out if we're not getting those funding or that funding from the feds, how do we fund what that money would come in for? How do we cover that with state dollars? And we've already talked about it many times that, you know, along with Michelle and Brian, that, you know, we're looking to find every way to cut and we're looking for every way to get more funds, right? But what do we work with what we have now? So the question was, how do we make up, without the cooperative agreements, there was about $350,000 in salary expense that was covered by that cooperative agreement and about $290,000 in testing funding from those cooperative agreements. So it left us with quite a gap to try to kind of cover that funding that we would initially have, you know, have replenished April 1st. So alarm bells going off. We had many conversations to have that tough call to cancel a lot of our contracts. We go back to that illustration before of the pie chart with only having, you know, a small chunk to reduce from. Unfortunately, our contracts were our first spot to really take that cut. It was really hard. It took a lot of work. I give a lot of kudos to Dr. Voss for having to have tough conversations with industry producers and just everyone all around. She really finesses speaking with those folks. So I really appreciate her and Dr. Hoefs for having those tough conversations. I don't know if Stephan worked her magic or if Minnesota was just heard, but we got news right around the time that we had canceled contracts a few weeks later that Minnesota would be expedited to have their cooperative agreements reinstated and to move forward. So that's where I go back to the green here in April, and it's not a joke, I swear. This is not an April Fool's joke. I thought about putting one in here, but I was like, not this time. We are fortunate enough that the cooperative agreement funding was expedited. I think actually this morning, our umbrella agreement, we just got the application to move forward with it. So we are looking to resume testing. A little bit of the hiccup there is because we canceled contracts. We have to, you know, get those reinstated to resume and also negotiate a few contracts that ended would have originally ended March 31st. So it takes a little bit of time to get through that, but as soon as we have those executed, we plan to resume testing. We do recognize that there is still some ways that the board could keep cutting expense, whether that's travel, just extra things to make sure that we're kind of staying in line with that budget. Just another thing, we did send out on March 5th, kind of a budget freeze memo. It hasn't been rescinded at this time, because like I said, we're still looking at ways that the board could spend less and be the best stewards of our taxpayers' dollars, especially going into a new biennium and not knowing what that looks like for us. So I believe this got sent out to all board staff members and board directors. Fiscal year 26 and forward. This was a similar slide to last time. We recognize that those three items up there, salary, minute costs, and our surveillance testing rates, are going to increase. Problem is if we don't see our funding increase, we are going to have to make probably some decisions on what gets cut if we don't see in this biennium significant funding increase. Our operating adjustments that we had submitted in the fall was roughly $500,000 more a year, 500,000. So far in the bills presented, it hasn't been close. I think Michelle mentioned House File 1704. Rep Anderson had mentioned an operating increase of about 300 and something thousand, which was about the closest that we got to our target. But like Michelle mentioned, there's so many different targets right now. To blend those all together and see what it really is going to look like is kind of to be determined. So I hope that I'm not back in the red at our next board meeting on the timeline when I have to talk to you. But hoping that things pan out. Otherwise, we'll be having another conversation. I also just want to say that, a lot of agencies like the Department of Health are looking at ways that they've had to cut their budget due to federal dollars. I hope that's something that the board doesn't have to endure, but my thoughts are with all those agencies that are having to make those tough decisions. Otherwise, I can open it up for questions.
So good for now, but we don't know.
Good for now, as far as the end of the fiscal year for 25, which is the end of that is June 30th, 2025. Typically, we would have a finalized number by May when the session ends and everything was kind of laid out as far as a budget. I don't know if, Michelle, do you think that will slate for a May?
We're done on time, but it's just really hard to say what's gonna happen.
Yeah, so the end of legislative session is May 19th. So we're hoping to have something kind of put together. We have budget estimates, but until we have that finalized number, it's kind of up in the air for 26, 27 and forward.
And as far as the cooperative agreements, I wish I can say I did some magic, but I think it was in part, Dr. Hoefs, the commissioner, the board making the decision to cut the testing was a very loud testament. And then any, rumblings that caused through industry. And that was happening in other states too. I know Iowa had to do the same thing, stop covering NPIP testing. And I'm sure some other states had to do that. I mean, there's still many grants and cooperative agreements for other agencies and, that are still kind of on hold. We were fortunate to hear that. And Dr. Hayes heard it first, actually. He told me that.
And fortunate that we got the same amount of funding as last year. So other states had significant cuts. I just heard from Dr. Thompson that they were denied for a lot of their testing, their NPIP testing. So South Dakota is not offering that. producers anymore, so. And, you know, kind of the big picture here is, you know, why do we keep feeling this crunch? And it's just like, we're not keeping up with cost of living. So, IT costs seem exponentially greater every year, but, Minute doesn't get appropriations from the budget. So all of their funding comes from what they charge state agencies. So, I get why they have to charge more, but, you know, we're still dealing with cost of living increases. I've said this at multiple board meetings, cost of living increases that labor unions were able to get approved and great. So 5% one year, 4.5% the following year, but that didn't come with additional funding to our budget. So we were scraping out of existing funds that I think we had planned for tops 3%.
Yeah.
So
Between 2.5 to 3%. And that's another good point, because we'll be going into another negotiation for contracts here that would start July 1st. So we'll see what those cost of living increases look like going forward. So lots of costs that continue to go up, but yeah, not having the funding continuing to go up alongside it, or at least not at the same rate, is proving to be what we are struggling with.
I found talking to legislators that they didn't recognize that we weren't funded for that increase. They were shocked that didn't come with additional appropriations. We asked for it, but it was declined. So, and it's not just us, other agencies are kind of dealing with the same thing. Actually, the USDA had similar issues at the same time for the same reason. So that's why we keep asking for more, because we're just not catching up to the cost of living that everyone is experiencing.
Yeah, and like Stephan said, you know, it was a bold but needed move to stop the testing. And unfortunately, I think it gave a very loud message and gave us some sort of publicity of, hey, we need to be heard over here, and this is what we do, being at, you know, less than 1% of the overall state budget. You know, I say this all the time, we're a needle in the haystack. So unless we're crying and wailing, I think this was a good time, unfortunately, to be heard. And I think this session we're being heard. It's just everybody wants money.
Any other questions for Melissa? Thank you.
Thank you.
So we are ahead of schedule for lunch. So we'll take a 30-minute break for lunch. Is food here?
I just saw something come up on the screen.
That it is. Okay. So 30 minutes, we will resume at 12:10.
All right, so I'm going to, my name is Dr. Nicole Neeser, and I'm the director of the Dairy Meat Inspection Division at the Minnesota Department of Agriculture. And I've been the primary lead here on implementing H5N1 milk surveillance in Minnesota. So I chatted with you probably 2 meetings ago, and so I'm here to provide an update about where things are at. All right, so I thought I would just provide a brief review of the USDA order and national milk testing strategy. So back in November, December timeframe, the USDA announced that they were proceeding with what they're calling the national milk testing strategy, meaning using milk to test for influenza in livestock and to address the number of increasing cases that were happening in the US, particularly in the western part of the US. So the national milk testing strategy has 5 stages outlined. I always say that it's important to remember that these stages aren't really all sequential. So normally you'd be like, we start in stage 1 and then we move to stage 2 and move to stage 3. Well, we actually decided to start in stage 2. Stage 1 is using silo testing. So like a collection of milk at processing plants. So that's bulk milk collected and commingled to do surveillance. We had looked at this program and decided that this didn't make a lot of sense for us here in Minnesota. For one thing, one of our plants told us that if you collect one of those samples, we could have 66 sources of milk in that sample. And if it was positive, we would have to do all the trace back work, collect all the records and documents. The information is there in the dairy industry. It's a very traceable system. We have a really highly documented process of moving milk and tracking it. However, it would just take a lot of time, probably longer than we had to do a timely response to a positive. So we decided to start in stage 2, which is bulk milk tank testing on individual farms. And now we find ourselves, I think we would be called stage 3. I haven't received an official notification from USDA, but essentially we're detecting and responding to the virus after our positive that we had last week. So ideally, we want to move Minnesota. And then stage 5 doesn't happen until all the states in the US are free of the virus. All right, so what's happening across the US in terms of the national milk testing? So I actually pulled these maps off of the USDA website yesterday. This changes frequently, so I tried to wait as long as I could to see. So the map there on your left is the current status by state. So 45 states have enrolled. Actually, the 3 states that have not enrolled are North Dakota, I believe Massachusetts, I think that, and Florida. Massachusetts is actually kind of an interesting scenario. They have actually tested all of their dairy herds for influenza. However, they did not use a known laboratory to do that. And so all of their lab samples have not really been considered valid. And they've been debating that with the USDA. So they actually have demonstrated that they don't have the virus. However, they're still listed as not participating. And then on the other side of the screen here on your right is the view that shows the affected versus the unaffected states. I did see we are listed now as an affected state, so I'm not sure if that flipped over the weekend. And then 3 states have essentially proven themselves negative through sequential testing. Colorado, they were really the first state to jump in on the milk testing program. Mississippi, which went very quickly. They have a very small dairy industry in Mississippi. And then Pennsylvania, which was one of the very first states in also on the milk testing side. So this is kind of where everything is at nationally. All right, so how about in Minnesota? So just a little bit of a review about how we collect milk from farms in Minnesota and how we collect samples. So our dairy inspection program, actually dairy inspection is one of the oldest regulatory programs that we have. And we have a very well-established system for collecting samples that we use for regulatory purposes. And we have actually bulk haulers that are licensed to collect samples on behalf of the Minnesota Department of Agriculture for regulatory purposes. We have labs that are certified and evaluated to run laboratory tests on our behalf. And so we have a system that is a really good system to build on whenever we need to do something like this. So every time milk is picked up on a farm, the hauler is going to be there to collect a sample. Those samples go with those trucks to the processing plant. There are intake screening labs at nearly all of the plants that we have. At that plant, the samples are screened for antibiotic testing. And then the individual farm samples are sent to labs for further testing. So every tanker of milk is tested for antibiotics, and individual farm samples collected every time milk is picked up on that farm. As the industry has grown, that practice changes a little bit where we have direct load tankers, so very large volumes of milk. We will collect those samples at the processing plant, but there is still a sample collected from every tanker of milk. So when we looked into building our program, we thought this would be a really good opportunity to collect samples from Minnesota dairy farms and get them tested. So our testing plan, we've settled in on all the details, we've implemented it. Our goal is really to sample all of our cow farms. So this is only cattle farms that we're testing with each sampling effort. So we have, as of March 1st, we're at 1,623 cow farm permits in Minnesota. Our goal is to sample each farm every month. So our sampling event is 1 month. Our statistical analysis that we've done shows that in order to be relatively confident at any given point of time, that we would have to collect around 1,400 farms to be confident, to have enough samples to be confident that we don't have the virus in the state. When we looked at that, we were like, well, we got about 1,625 farms, 1,650 farms. We got to do 1,400 of them. Let's just do them all. Gives us a little bit of wiggle room if we aren't able to quite get all the samples, and so that's how we proceeded. We are also planning to continue sampling until we are able to demonstrate we are unaffected. It is a little bit unclear about how long this will be, but we were initially told that at least 3 months consecutive negatives would be required. So we basically completed our first full month. We had a positive, so we would have to sort of restart that 3-month window next month. So we know for sure we will be sampling April, May, and June as a baseline, all farms every month. And then we would reevaluate after that point in time what the frequency might be going forward. So who's participating? All Minnesota producers are tested. Regardless of where they ship the milk. So that was a common question that we've been getting, is like, well, what about producers that ship their milk out of state? We still get regulatory samples from those farms every time milk is picked up on those farms. They go to our labs, and so we still have access to those samples, and so they are included in the sampling plan. So all Minnesota producers. Producers also cannot decline to participate. So we've had our inspectors are out in farms doing inspections, and the farmer's like, well, I want to decline. Well, that's actually not an option. They don't even know when the samples are being taken, actually, because we are collecting these samples all the time, and the labs are choosing when to collect those samples on our behalf. As a cooperator with USDA, MDA gains the regulatory authority for the sampling program. So essentially any point in the production chain, we have the authority to collect samples for this program. So at the farm, at the plant, or at the lab. We do have farms that come on and off the market for various reasons. So for example, farms that are seasonal, they might dry up for a little while. We actually don't have that many dairy farm or cow farms that do that. We have lots of goat farms that do that, but not very many cow farms that are seasonal anymore. But we do have other farms that are going on and off the market for various reasons. Also, maybe we suspended them because they had too high of a somatic cell count or bacteria. So those farms are also caught. So as soon as they start shipping milk, we are collecting samples for regulatory purposes, and so they will also be included as soon as they start shipping milk. We've allowed dairy producers to request their results, obviously negative results, because if they have positive, they're going to find out through the response. But negative results by emailing us at testingmilk.mda. If they do this, we will have them complete a short request survey form to help us validate their identity before we just release the results. We basically ask them for a piece of information that is essentially on their dairy inspection, like only they would know that, where to find it. So we're doing that. We actually have only had one farm request their results so far. So I think people right away were like, yeah, we want the results, we want to know we're testing. And then after the program got going, people are like, oh yeah, well, I suppose you'll tell us if we're positive, right? So we haven't had too much interest in that. We are getting the samples. So as noted, the hauler collects a sample that is delivered to the plants, and it goes into a screening lab. Typically those samples then go to a confirmation laboratory, or we call them Section 6 labs, but that is typically at a centralized laboratory. So those samples are already getting shipped from the screening to the centralized laboratory. So what we're doing is we're collecting subsamples at those centralized laboratories. So we're having the lab staff, we've trained them, they have the procedure to collect essentially a very small amount of milk, essentially half a mil, putting it in the sample tube, labeling it with the farm identification number, and then shipping them off to the veterinary diagnostic lab. So we're essentially splitting a sample or subsampling at these industry labs to collect our sample. So here's just a diagram, kind of shows how that works. There is a dairy at the U of M St. Paul campus, so we kind of use that one as the demo here. That the sample from that dairy will go to their industry laboratory. And it is identified, when it does that, it is identified with what we call the plant and patron information. So all dairy plants have a number assigned to them, and then every patron or every dairy producer has a number. And so we use that as a sort of a unique identifier for them. So it goes to the lab with that number. The lab then takes a list that we provided them that has the plant patron numbers and the premise identification numbers, and they take that to match those pieces of data. They take the subsample and label the tubes. And the tubes are really labeled like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. You know, we don't put all that information on the tubes. But then they keep a submission form that links, that has the tube numbers, and then a spreadsheet that links tube number 1 is this farm, tube number 2 is this farm. So I think there has been a little bit of discussion perhaps about response, but one of our concerns, of course, is we're asking the labs to handle a lot of information manually. They're used to doing a lot of it not manually, digitally, and so this is a little bit different process. So anytime we have a positive, we're going to want to go out to that farm, collect another sample to verify, like, yes, we do indeed have the correct farm, because you know, there's a chance that samples could get mixed up. We are using MTM sample tubes, so these have a media in it that allow the essentially allow the virus to be stable in those tubes and allow us to not have to ship the samples on ice, which helps a lot with the shipping cost. Also, it provides us with an extended testing window. So let's say there's an issue with, the lab gets the samples collected on Monday, and then, they forgot to put it in the FedEx overnight, and so they didn't get it in for 2 days. That's no problem, because we've essentially stabilized the virus in those samples. Or it allows the veterinary diagnostic lab some flexibility in terms of when they run the sample when they get it. So let's say, Wednesday they got, 700 samples and they couldn't run them all. That's fine, because we have essentially set up the samples so they can sit and wait for those results. Our labs are expected per the protocol to ship them and the day that they collect them overnight to the lab on the next day. But again, we've kind of built in that window so that they wouldn't have to do that. Right now we have all of our labs are participating. So we spent most of this month making sure all the labs were on board, getting the samples in. So we're working with 4 main labs, and the size of their box corresponds to how many producers they're collecting samples for. So lab 1 is collecting the most. Lab 2 is the second most, lab 3 and lab 4. The green boxes are out-of-state labs. So we have 3 main in-state centralized labs. Those are super easy for us to get on board. We work with them all the time. We had the out-of-state lab, a little harder for us to get on board because we couldn't just drive there and meet with them. So we had to do a lot of that virtually. So they were the last lab to get on board, but they did actually end up collecting samples last week on Thursday and Friday. And then we have actually about 20 producers that their samples go to sort of random out-of-state labs based on who they sell their milk to. And so, for example, there's one lab in South Dakota that is associated with a plant. They receive samples for 3 producers. So we had to call them and be like, all right, you got 3 producers. And instead of us trading them all on the subsampling procedure, we're just having them ship their samples to, or a sample to lab 1, and then lab 1 will subsample for them. So as of last Friday, all of those samples had also been shipped for those producers. So, and those labs are then, of course, shipping samples to the VDL. So how far are we? We started sampling the week of February 24th with the first lab. So a lot of talk this morning about federal funding. We had planned to start this project early in the first week of February. However, due to the federal funding freeze, in January, the funding was temporarily frozen. We didn't have the agreements in place yet. And so, we had to wait. When, the first cases in the West were announced with the strain, the D11 strain, so we knew then that there were herds that were getting the virus, not the same strain as last year, so we knew there was a different strain out there. At the state level, we decided we were going to go ahead with the sampling anyway. And so we initiated for February 24th, continuing to work with USDA to get the federal funding. And since then we have formalized that. I think that, but I have that on another slide. So we did, for February 1st, or the last week of February, we sampled with one lab, and that was kind of our test lab to make sure all the procedures were in place and everything. We had all the documentation correctly, and to be honest, that lab did a fantastic job getting going. We did have a few minor hiccups, such as they typed the email address wrong, or they forgot to ship overnight, and they shipped not overnight to the diagnostic lab, which turns out it makes a really big difference in terms of where they deliver things at the university. So we had to track down some samples, but again, we kind of built that in with the approach of using the MTM tubes, knowing things might not go perfectly. So in March, we worked and essentially got all the labs on board throughout the month. As of last Friday, we had sampled 1,466 unique farms. We've actually submitted more samples than that because some of the labs submitted duplicate samples kind of on accident because they were kind of running through them, trying to get the procedures up and so fast. But we did do 90%, and actually there was I think a number of samples submitted on Monday for March as well. So we're feeling pretty good about where we ended up for the first month here. That we definitely reached our threshold for sort of saying that we're negative, although we have positive, so we can't really say we're negative, but for detecting sort of the incident and prevalence in the state. So we're feeling pretty good about that. All the labs have submitted is the other thing. So we know everyone has all the supplies and materials they need. They know what to do. And so we're looking forward here to April running very smoothly. So as noted, our funding was delayed. And so we did delay the implementation. And I think there was a bit of strategy in this too, because we do have the state ag emergency money, and this milk sampling is actually costing about $275,000. So it was, I mean, it's a lot, but it's not like $2 million or anything like that. And so we did have the funds to cover it if we needed to. We at the beginning were kind of standing our ground, saying like, hey, this is a federally mandated program. If you're going to mandate it, you got to pay for it. So we did stand our ground for quite a while there. And about the time we decided we would pay for it on state funding, USDA actually came back and unfroze the funds. So we were able to get a pre-award letter from USDA to pay for most sampling costs. There's a contracted rate that we're paying out to those 4 main industry labs. Actually, all the other little labs, they just agreed to do it because we're just like, I mean, we're paying for the shipping, but they're just like, oh, we'll just do it. You don't need to pay us because, they're like, it's two milk samples. It's not a big deal. So we also are providing supplies such as the testing, the MTM tubes, shipping boxes, and pipetters. We are working on getting the full cooperative agreement. So a pre-award letter allows us to spend up to 25% of the total award in the first 90 days, but it doesn't allow us to actually get any money. So we can't request a reimbursement yet until we get that cooperative agreement done. I just submitted the plan to USDA yesterday. So hopefully we'll get that plan approved and in place soon so we can start to get reimbursed for that. Any costs not covered will be covered by our state ag emergency fund. We have some staffing costs and things that can't be covered under a cooperative agreement. But those are pretty minimal. A lot of that, again, is we're subcontracting out with those industry labs who are doing most of the heavy lifting. We've done a lot of outreach along with this program. So we, of course, have trained the laboratory staff with instructions, and we have written procedures. We worked pretty hard to get the samples scheduled over the month. So essentially we have a schedule where lab 1 is collecting in week 1 and 2, and lab 2 is collecting in week 3, and lab 3 is collecting in week 4, and lab 4 is collecting at a different time to make sure we don't overwhelm the resources at the VDL. We also had to kind of iron out the legal authorities for our sampling and making sure that everyone who's handling private data is doing so accordingly. So we have that written into our contracts. We have done stakeholder meetings, webinar outreach presentations. Dr. Hoefs and I have done numerous presentations and meetings on this topic over the past couple of months. In February, as soon as we knew we were ready to go, we sent a letter actually out to all of our dairy farms. So one interesting thing about how we track dairy farms is we actually only keep their addresses. So we have their location and we have their mailing address. We do not keep emails and we do not keep phone numbers for those farms as a routine. And so really the only way we had to reach out on a full scale basis is to send them a letter. So that's what we did. And we did, of course, many media events as well. And then we have scheduled a follow-up webinar for this Friday. Now that we've completed about a month of testing and have a little bit more information, we're doing another webinar just to get producers or industry members a chance to ask questions. And hopefully, they're starting to feel a little more comfortable now that we've gotten through essentially testing everyone, we're starting to feel more comfortable knowing we didn't have, 50 positive farms. We just had one. So it puts us in a better place, kind of knowing how we have to scale response and testing. I think this is a similar slide as I had the last time I talked, but just to acknowledge that this is really a partnership. So on the MDA side, we're doing the surveillance and the milk testing, but of course, working closely with Board of Animal Health and USDA to do the response and the diagnostic lab to do the testing, as well as the human health side on the human health monitoring. With that, I would be happy to take any questions.
Any questions?
Do you guys test the dairy goats for this?
No, so this is just targeted on cattle.
Okay.
So, yep.
Is there a reason why they don't test the goats? Because I know we had one positive case on the goats, so I was just curious why they don't get tested.
Probably the most straightforward answer is they were not included in the USDA order as animals to test. Also, perhaps a unique or a kind of maybe unknown is that the USDA order also covered milk intended for pasteurization. So technically did not cover milk that would be used to manufacture raw dairy products. So they had a very specific target for that original order. I'm told that perhaps there is another updated order coming out at some point soon that would also loop in those milk for raw milk products. But I think in terms of the goats, I think they just haven't seen the same health effects on the goat herds.
Yeah, I think that's the only detection they've had in goats was that one we had, and it was kind of an odd infection. It was a backyard flock that was sharing water sources, so it really hasn't been reported in goats to this point. Now, I say that, and you're likely to look for it.
Yeah.
One curious thing that I didn't mention in my updates, there was actually a sheep that tested positive for H5N1 in England. And kind of the same situation. It was a backyard flock, but one thing that I found curious is they reported one of the signs that this ewe had, part of why they recognized she was sick and eventually called her was she had mastitis. So we know that's one of the main signs in dairy cattle. Now, they didn't say the mastitis was due to H5N1, but those of us who are dealing with it in dairy cattle kind of raised an eyebrow wondering if there is a need to look a little bit closer in some of those.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, we do have well over 100 goats, milking goat operations here in Minnesota. Yep.
Any other questions for Nikki? Okay. Thank you for your update. Yep, Sean.
Okay, I'm gonna give just some updates on the poultry side of things, and Dr. Hayes covered a lot of what I was gonna cover, so that I should be able to zip through those, and Dr. Schaefbauer also covered some stuff, but I've got some information at the end that I think
Sorry.
Dr. Holzbauer. So, just a quick update on where we're sitting with our high path cases. You kind of heard the news is that we haven't had any recent detections. So that brings our total case count in Minnesota up to 185 in 50 counties, and a total of 9.1 million birds have been depopulated. And I love this map because it's our active control areas and there are no circles on it. So that is good news. But what brings us to maybe even the better news is that last Friday we were able to self-declare freedom against high path and poultry. And that is specifically only on the commercial side of things. So we do still have three, we call them the World Organization for Animal Health low and non-poultry. So there are backyard flocks that are still under quarantine, and they're sitting under a 120-day fallow period right now. But we are still able to declare that self-freedom off of the release and meeting all the requirements for those commercial flocks. The whole event incident in Minnesota will be final and closed after all fallow periods have been met and all premises quarantines have been lifted. So I don't have a timeline on that unless Mackenzie's got kind of an estimated in the back there. But it's going to be another couple months before we are even probably to that point. So we'll see what the rest of the spring brings and go from there. I just want to point out the cases that we do still keep track of on the dashboard. I want to give Michael some kudos on updating this. One thing that we did add on here is the genotype. Just right here. So we're pulling that information out of our federal database, EMERS. And so for the science nerds out there that like to kind of keep track of what the virus is doing and how it's changing and the different strains that we're seeing in poultry, that information is being posted on the website. So the spring cases, I think I've mentioned at previous board meetings, have primarily been the D11 strain. So we're not seeing that dairy strain in our poultry like we had been seeing last spring and summer. The national picture, I don't have a lot to report here. This is just the data that's been pulled off the USDA website. I think it's maybe only updated once a week on Thursdays. I kind of checked yesterday and it hadn't been updated. But just to see the total number of confirmed flocks in the last 30 days. And Indiana, Ohio, and Illinois kind of continue to be the hot spots. I think things are finally starting to settle down in Ohio, but they were hit pretty hard this spring with a lot of table leg layers facilities. And so I can't see my notes on here, but I want to say they lost like 23 million birds just, since the start of the outbreak, and I think the majority of that was this year. So, that's why our egg prices are so high when you start to lose that many birds in that short of a period of time. To talk a little bit about the VCAP program, and so Stephan kind of gave you the overview of the whole audit process and then the different assessments that are now available. I just want to talk about kind of our experience with the VCAP audits here in Minnesota, but this is my summary slide that I think I showed you last time. Looking at what this rule means as far as the indemnity and the different types of audits. So we've got our restock audits, which are our infected farms that will need to have a biosecurity audit prior to restocking. And then our buffer zone placement audits, which is that control area for those who want to move birds into that. As you can, this is another repeat from last time, but just kind of a reminder of what's involved with these. There's 3 sections involved with each of these audits. There's a review of the written biosecurity plan. And so every producer has to have specifically written in there the requirements in order audit form needs a pass in order to pass the whole audit, but there is an opportunity for what's called remediations needed, where it's basically corrective actions to get in compliance. So in Minnesota, we've got, I think this number is correct, but we've got 11 auditors who have gone through the VCAP training. And the reason why I wasn't at the meeting last week was because they were doing the USDA training that week. We have conducted 3 audits, as Stephan mentioned. One of those was a buffer zone placement. So it was a placement into our Dakota O2 control area. They were receiving poults. And then we've done our 2 high path infected commercial farms that were detected in 2025. We did those restock audits. I tried to put a little bit of perspective about how much time is involved with these audits. And so I tried to make an average, and I know an average of 3 doesn't mean a whole lot, but those audits ranged anywhere from 3 days to 45 days from the start of that material requested until we actually were able to sign off on it. So this audit process is not necessarily for the faint of heart. Where we requested material, it did require some remediations to get them into compliance. And, we had a little bit of time to work with to make sure that, but I think the other audit, our buffer zone placement, that was still 5 days. That was our first audit that we did. It was tough for everybody involved because there was a learning curve. And I think these will get easier over time. But it's definitely more involved than what we had been doing on our previous audits for these buffer zone placements. I've been trying to do some outreach to our growers to make sure that they understand that everybody needs to make sure that their biosecurity plans are updated. Just because you passed an NPIP audit in the past does not mean that your plan is sufficient to be able to pass one of these. And so they do all need revisions. I did meet with the turkey growers. They had a couple regional meetings on March 13th. I met 2 groups of individuals to try to make sure that they understood the implications of this and to also remind them that this is going to be a process. So it's not just an event where you just go and get your audit and you're done. We need to be prepared to kind of work together and get this done. I'm also pushing USDA pretty hard to make sure that there's some audit guidelines to make sure that there's some consistency in how these are done. So if you remember, there's different individuals that are involved with this. There's an auditor, and that can be a state individual or federal USDA individual. But then there's also a audit reviewer that has to be a federal veterinary medical officer. And so, these are gonna go better if we're all on the same page as far as what's expected for each of these questions and kind of those minimum standards of what we're looking for. Quick update on avian metapneumovirus. I know Dr. Hoefs mentioned this briefly. It continues to be a big problem in Minnesota. And our turkey industry is getting hit kind of time and time again. So it doesn't ever really seem to go away, even though we seem to get these waves. And so some producers talk about getting them twice within one flock. And the implications of the clinical science that they're seeing sometimes is really significant when we see mortality rates that are comparable to what we see with high path. And so we continue to do a lot of testing. We first do a lot of high path, and then we, if those samples are negative, then they get forwarded on for pneumovirus testing. And so until we can kind of get a vaccine in order and to be effective, but we'll continue to kind of deal with this issue. And so I threw this one in here. This is not something that the board has put forward, but just as a reminder, the Minnesota Department of Agriculture does have a I'll bring up my slide. Rural Financial. Let's see. Authority, thank you, to be able to provide some funding for some of these growers that are impacted by this. And so it's not an indemnity program. It doesn't cover lost birds. But for those who need some zero interest loans in order to make maybe some improvements on their facility to help protect against pneumovirus, this is out there. And this does go back to anybody who's been impacted from April 1st, 2024. And we'll go through February of 2026. Okay, so just to touch on the vaccines here, Dr. Hoefs mentioned that USDA has given approval to bring in some vaccines from Europe. And there's two different categories of vaccines that are now available. We've got the inactivated killed vaccines, which have to be, in general, an injection. And so trying to do that kind of broad scale across a lot of different types of poultry is not reasonable. But some of our high value birds, like our breeder birds, have been using these since probably mid-fall. And I haven't heard a lot of pros and cons either way. It's certainly labor intensive to do that. But recently we did get approval, and we as the United States got approval to bring in some modified live vaccines from Europe, which is ultimately where we kind of need to get in order to help provide some broad protection for the industry. And so there's two companies that at least I've given approval for in Minnesota, Vaccinova, which is a Minnesota-based company, but they have a partner in Europe that provides, it makes this pneumovirus vaccine. And then the Zoetis. There's not enough vaccine immediately to just make it available for everybody. And so these companies are having to try to prioritize who gets the first available vaccines. And they've kind of unilaterally decided that distribution will be started at a hatchery level and to make sure that those initial poults can get vaccinated. And then as that availability increases for those vaccines, then it'll be more widely available across the industry. I checked with one of our hatcheries who was planning on using this. They started their first vaccine at the hatchery level yesterday. And it sounds like there's probably some learning curve involved with the administration, but I was told poults got vaccinated. So I'm taking that as a win. Okay. And then lastly, I just wanted to touch on a project that the Board of Animal Health is conducting along with the Department of Health and the University of Minnesota. And a lot of these slides are Dr. Holzbauer's, and so I'm hoping that if I can't address all of the questions on these, that she's still available to help get through this. But just kind of a little bit of history as to why this project has come to be. We know that backyard poultry raising has been increasing in popularity. It kind of started back in COVID, and it really hasn't gone away. And I won't dive into these stats here, but even this year, we're hearing a lot of reports of people who want to raise birds and want to get baby chicks, and they're having a hard time sourcing them because the demand is so high. But certainly anytime that we're raising poultry, and especially with people who maybe aren't as experienced with that, we increase our risk of zoonotic disease, specifically Salmonella and Campylobacter. So this is some stats with Minnesota's the Minnesota Department of Health has accumulated for human infections related to Salmonella and those who have been tied to backyard poultry. And so these figures, 53% of those who have had Salmonella were women, 18% were children, 20% ended up hospitalized. And so those are those numbers that you start to get really concerned about with diseases like this. At 84% is those who are raising poultry in a rural setting versus an urban setting. And 63% of those infected had birds that they sourced as chicks that year. And so it's a pretty high number that's kind of tied to those baby chicks. And then 80% of those who were affected bought those birds from a retail like feed store, you know, the Tractor Supplies and the Runnings and things like that. And certainly just because of the seasonality of chick raising, we tend to see most of our cases in the spring and into early summer. And so what the Department of Health does when they get notified that there was a human who has a positive test result, so say salmonella, that information from the clinic then goes to a team at the Department of Health, their epidemiology team. Or if they've got samples that are being collected at a clinical laboratory, and then those go through their Department of Health Public Health Laboratory and have confirmation of Salmonella or Campylobacter, those isolates then get sequenced. So they do a whole genome sequencing, and then those results are reported to their epidemiological team. And then that team then follows up with anybody who's been sick to try to identify common sources of exposure. So whether it's poultry contact or food borne, illness, they try to root that out. And then certainly provide some information about these diseases. And then if they determine that, they had contact or they likely were exposed through baby chicks or through poultry, they then share some of that information. So we don't get names and addresses, but we say, patient X reported buying some birds at feed store Y. And then they leave that for us to do some follow-up. So these are all stores that we permit through our NPIP program, and we require that they keep traceability information. So who bought birds and from when and where did they source those birds from? So it helps us, and it helps the Department of Health then be able to track that back to a potential hatchery that might be providing these infected birds. And so the project actually that I'm getting to here, stems back to, is there something that we can do prior to waiting until we have somebody that's sick and we get test results and then trying to do the trace back? Can we try to intervene earlier? And so over the last 3 years, the Board of Animal Health has partnered with the Department of Health, the Department of Health Public Health Laboratory, and then the University of Minnesota, so specifically Tim Johnson at the university, to try to determine which strains of salmonella are present in different types of birds and in specific shipments, and then try to share that information back to the hatchery so that they can do some mitigation measures in a more timely manner to try to prevent some of these infections. And so this was something that started as a CDC pilot project back in 2023. And that pilot project is no longer, but Minnesota, we've decided we can continue doing it. So we've been working with the Department of Health. And what we specifically are doing, this is kind of the complicated web of the backyard chicken industry, where you've got a lot of different breeding farms, which are there over on the left-hand side of the screen, that then feed into a centralized hatchery. And then from those hatcheries, they get distributed through to homes, to agriculture distributors like feed stores. And then there's the complicated piece that they do something called drop shipping. So if you place your order through, hatchery A, and they are not able to fill that order, they might reach out to hatchery B to fill that order. And so it might look like it's coming from hatchery A, but in reality it's coming. So the traceability can be kind of complicated. And so what we're trying to do is do our sampling at the distributor and just kind of take it back one step from waiting until these birds end up at a house to get our samples. Dr. Tim Johnson, I mentioned, from the University of Minnesota, he's very experienced in a lot of different types of poultry research that he does, specifically with salmonella. And so he's kind of, he's been kind of the mastermind at being able to culture, and he's been very successful at identifying which of these chick papers are positive. And if you can see this picture up on the top, it looks like straw. That's some of the bedding that comes within these boxes as these chicks are delivered. And so it's not easy to just take a swab of it and wipe it down and then try to culture that. And so he actually immerses the entire pad within the culture medium and then follows our routine NPIP surveillance testing methods in order to isolate. And then if he's got samples that he has determined off of culture are negative, he'll then take a subset of that sample and do a PCR test on it to try to pick up anything that might have been missed by culture alone. Just some data on how this information has helped us the last couple of years. So this is data from 2023 and 2024. The Public Health Laboratory at the Department of Health has isolated or evaluated 168 isolates that were originally cultured at Dr. Johnson's lab. 7 different serotypes of salmonella were identified, and 4 of those were linked to backyard poultry infections. And out of a total of 74 human infections, this is where Stacy to double check my information on this. But the bottom line is the information that we've gathered through this has helped to kind of put those puzzle pieces together with human infections as well to try to better understand how that bacteria is being transmitted and where it's coming from. So we are doing this again this year. So we're just getting going with it. We hope to enroll up to 11 retail feed stores and hatcheries, and we are doing the contact of them last week and this week. What we do at the Board of Animal Health is we make the initial communication to these stores, explain the project and what we are expecting of them, and then we provide them with sample kits. So their store themselves is actually the one that collects the samples. And all they have to do is, when they take the chicks out of the box to put on display, they take that pad and put it in a Ziploc bag and label it, provide us with the paperwork from the hatchery. And then we have one of our board staff or USDA staff or even some Department of Health interns will drive around to these stores and pick those up and get them delivered to the Mid-Century Research and Outreach Center, the McBrock Center in Wilmer, where Tim Johnson has his lab to do that testing. And then any positives from his lab get forwarded to the Department of Health lab for whole genome sequencing. So I highlight this project for you as it's kind of a nice One Health example of what works really well in Minnesota and how we've been kind of partnership. So, not only are we partnering with other agencies, but it makes a good connection with our stores as well. So we have that kind of positive feedback to them. They feel like they're participating. We do provide them with summary data at the end of the project so they kind of understand, and it helps to reinforce, why we are always asking them to make sure that they have a hand wash station or that they're giving out the information on salmonella. But also we're kind of looking to see, is there a better way to try to control salmonella? Can we take it back a little bit further in the process instead of waiting until somebody gets sick? Yeah, I think that's kind of the big thing there. So like I said, we're starting this project this week, hopefully getting some samples collected next week. And then, maybe by the next board meeting, we'll have some updates on how well that went and other information. So with that, if you have any questions, and I'll turf the hard ones to Stacy.
Thanks for Shauna.
Can you just clarify the connection to the BCAP audit and Declaration of Freedom from IPAP?
So I asked that question yesterday to get clarification. So with the BCAP audit, I think I've mentioned in the past, until the state declares freedom, the infected farms need to be re-audited every 6 months. I believe that our freedom date from last Friday clears us from that requirement, but I'm trying to get some verification on that because there are a couple different levels of freedom that USDA uses depending on how it's communicated to our trading partners. And so I think it does, but don't put that down in writing to get that clarification.
So our hope is that this actually halts the need to do the BCAP audits until we get another infection, basically.
So our Dakota O2 and our Medina O2 don't need to then
doing that.
Follow-up audit in 6 months.
The remediation examples that you usually end up doing, like where are the gaps that you find during the audits?
Through the audits. So a lot of it has to do with what's written in their plans. So, we've been auditing these written biosecurity plans for like 6 or 8 years now. But there are some specific questions that say, for example, dogs and cats are not allowed into the barn. Well, you ask producers that, and they're like, well, no, of course they're not allowed in the barn. But if it's not written into their plan, it doesn't count, right? We can't say yes to that. And so it's taken a fair bit of effort there. And then the other big thing that we've run into is the documentation of who's crossing the perimeter buffer area. They need to have sign-in sheets for that, and things like feed truck drivers also need to sign in. And so that's kind of a big change from what the industry has done before. And it's taken, frankly, some industry coordination to figure out, if there's one feed company that provides, to 100 farms, can they keep track of some of that documentation and that communication about training? They all need to be trained on the biosecurity plans in order to make sure that all of the farms are meeting it. So it's been kind of a complicated thing, and we're all still trying to figure it out a little bit.
The poultry litter composting, is that pasteurized? Like how do we, like with the milk, how we are concerned about, before it is used as a fertilizer. So on the poultry litter wise, what is the usual practice as far as before it goes as a fertilizer?
I might shift that question to Erica, but as far as the VCAP audits goes, there's not a specific requirement for litter to go through some sort of a virus elimination phase for non-infected farms. That's part of your routine biosecurity. But Erica, can you talk a little bit about?
Yeah, can you say?
If it's an infected farm and then you have the poultry litter in the farm.
Sorry, I didn't realize you were talking about the infected litter.
Infected versus not infected, but like infected for sure, because before, like how we restock the birds, before they're restocked, what are the measures that are taken to the litter that is coming out of that particular farm? How do we?
Do you want me to tackle that, or do you want me?
Well, I can talk about my experience. So, for our farm and depending on the type of farm, it might be different. So like on a breeder's farm, you could maybe talk about that, but for my farm specifically, all of our poultry litter and the turkeys that we were composting, as a grower, you have the option to compost that for, it's about 2 weeks inside your barn. And so that stays in your barn for 2 weeks, monitoring the temperature every day, because there's certain parameters that you have to meet. After that 2 weeks, you do have the option to move that material outside. And, in that 2 weeks, you have to turn that litter pile to reintroduce oxygen and continue that cooking process or that composting process. But after that, in the time frame of turning that material, then you have the option to move that pile outside and have that continue the compost process for another like 2 weeks and to monitor that process. And so myself as a grower, I chose to move that pile outside because that gives you the opportunity to start that cleaning process inside your barn. So making sure that all of the, like the material underneath that composting pile, all of that has to be taken out and put in that pile. And then your barns, everything gets completely washed. If you have things in your barn that need to be repaired, such as holes, it's like things like that has to be repaired. And then you actually have to be approved by your case manager to disinfect. So before you can come in and disinfect those barns, you do have to have your case manager come through and approve of that. And then your compost material, whether it's inside your barn or, outside at the end of that composting life, you do have to have approval to have that compost pile released. And then if you want to move that before your farm is out of quarantine, that requires a permit from the board.
So we have, yeah, that's great. We have subject matter experts in the composting process, and we're individuals who've been trained by USDA composting experts who kind of monitor the full process. So we're making sure that the virus is eliminated through that process before anything gets moved. And then we do ask that, and this is something that the permitting team kind of double checks, that litter's not being moved, I think it's 2 miles, maybe 3 miles within infected, another poultry farm. Okay, so we're just taking that extra little bit of precaution, even though the virus should be gone, that we're not spreading it right next to somebody else's farm.
And that, yeah, I didn't talk about that subject matter expert, but he was at my farm a lot. You know, just, I mean, to make sure that the piles were being built correctly, that the temperatures were meeting the adequate parameters. You know, there's a lot of oversight. I'll say to make sure that that material is being composted correctly. So, yeah. Any other questions? All right, thank you, Shauna. Okay.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Mary Wood. I am the new wildlife veterinarian with Minnesota DNR. And you were kind enough to invite me to just come by and have just 5 or so quick minutes to say hello, introduce myself. I was just going to tell you a real quick and dirty overview of my background and talk a little bit about my position with Minnesota DNR. I just started like the end of February. So I'll tell you right now, I'm drinking from the fire hose and I'm in that full swing of learning curve. Thankfully, my supervisor, Michelle Karstensen, is here. So if I can't answer questions, hopefully she will be able to answer them for me. My background, I am from Minnesota originally. So I did my undergrad in Fish and Wildlife and my DVMA and MPH all at University of Minnesota. I did work in private practice in Alexandria, Minnesota for about a year. And then I worked as a wildlife veterinarian for Wyoming Game and Fish for about 6 years, before then moving down to Colorado, where I was wildlife veterinarian for Colorado Parks and Wildlife for the last 5 years. I've had really amazing opportunities to do pretty cool things out west. I briefly considered, I was like, maybe I should send a PowerPoint of just really fun wildlife photos, but Minnesota is home. It's always been home. My family's here, my friends are here. And so when I saw this position came open, I really jumped at it. And I am so super excited to get to come back and work here in my home state and get to be with friends and family. As far as my position within Minnesota DNR, obviously it's a new position. I'm sure my role and the work I do will evolve over time. But I'll be doing a wide array of different support for the agency. And when I think about a wildlife veterinarian for a wildlife agency, a big part of what you do is service. You know, so I'll be helping support the agency in wildlife capture, chemical mobilization, you know, support and capture protocols, protocol review, development, those sorts of things. But I'm housed in our wildlife health department, our wildlife health program under Michelle. So I'll also be working on wildlife disease surveillance, monitoring, management, response, and hopefully also getting to do some research and collaborating on research. And then another big aspect, hopefully, of my role is going to be some of these interagency collaborations, working together with partners. You know, in my previous roles in both Wyoming and in Colorado, worked really closely with both domestic animal and human health counterparts. And those relationships were really critical to a lot of the work we did and certainly were highly valued. So lots of challenging times working with brucellosis in Wyoming. And then in Colorado, we had Hypath AI, rabbit hemorrhagic disease virus. Feels like lately we've had lots and lots of these shared disease issues that bring us together. So hopefully in my position, I will be able to attend meetings and get to collaborate with all of you, work with you, share information from work that you're doing back with our wildlife health team and our agency, but also share work that our agency is doing on wildlife health with this group, as well as others. And really, that is all that I have for you. Very quick and dirty hello. Thank you so much for inviting me to come here. I'm really, really excited and looking forward to working with all of you and happy to take any questions. And if I can't answer them, Michelle hopefully will be able to give you guys that information.
Well, welcome back to Minnesota.
Thank you.
Any questions?
Go ahead.
So if I get a call from the duty officer about a zombie house wren or finch, do I contact you or Michelle? That's a fresh one. That,
Yeah,
was over the weekend.
that's a good one though, because that's probably a finch mycoplasma or, finch
That's what Dr.
conjunctivitis.
Voss said.
Yeah, that is a feeding related disease, so it's nice to do some education on bird feeders and cleaning your bird feeder when it comes to that, so. Apparently, yes, you can send those
Right.
questions to me, I'm happy to see that. Well, thank you, everybody, very nice to meet you all.
Thank you. Okay, at this time, we've already gone into a private discussion to discuss the appointment of our executive director. So at this time, I would ask for a motion on our decision.
I would like to make a motion that we appoint Dr. Brian Hoefs as our executive director for the next year.
There's been a motion to appoint Dr. Hoefs for another year. Is there a second?
Also.
Okay, there's a second. Everybody seconded. Is there any discussion? Any discussion?
Very quickly, I think we've got a good person here that's doing a really good job. And I'm proud to say that in front of everybody.
I appreciate that, and it's not just me. Well, I will say, you don't do this job alone. It's surrounding yourself. Dr. Thompson always told me, this job is easy if you surround yourself with talented people, and that's where we're at. We've got a great.
And vote, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Seeing none, motion carries. Congratulations, Dr. Hoefs.
Thank you.
Okay, we are moving right along. We will continue on to the election of our board president and our vice president. At this time, I'll open up nominations for the president position.
I would like.
All right. Erica Sawatzke has been added to the slate. Are there any other nominations? Any other nominations? Okay, nominations closed. Is there a motion?
Make a motion to vote for Erica for president of the board.
And a second? Any discussion? All in favor, vote aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. All right,
Will you accept the job?
I will accept the role. All right, at this time, we'll open up nominations for vice president. Is there any nominations for vice president?
I would nominate Dr. Peggy Hawkins, vice president.
Okay, Dr. Hawkins. All right. Dr. Hawkins has been nominated. Are there any other nominations? Any other nominations? Nominations are closed. Is there a motion to move Dr. Hawkins into the vice president, vice president position?
I will cast unanimous ballot for Dr. Peggy Hawkins as our vice president.
Okay, there's been a unanimous ballot. Is there a second? Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Motion carries. All right. Are you going to accept it?
Sure, yes, sure. Some unfinished business.
Perfect. All right, no change in our election officers, so. Thank you, everybody. That concludes the majority of our agenda. We'll look at scheduling a December meeting now.
September.
We do have September scheduled, right?
Oh.
Yes. Can you remind us of the date? September 10th, I believe it's September 10th. September 10th, you said? Okay, so September meeting is set for September 10th. So we'll now be looking at December. The first or second week?
I would prefer if we did the first week.
The first week? First week, Tuesday or Wednesday? Second or third? Third? That's a Wednesday. The third work for everybody? Okay, we'll go with December 3rd. So at this time, we won't be adjourning our meeting. We have some closed session issues coming up to discuss. Do we have, Michael, anybody online for those? Or are they coming?
They're separate.
But are they here in person or?
I'd ask.
The first one was at 2:30. It is eventually.
Oh, I see. So, well, maybe for us board members, we'll take a break. And then we will come back in for those meetings, so no adjournment here. So let's have a question. Good afternoon. We are opening again to discuss the results of our closed session. We took a vote. The vote was 4-2 to provide the service producer 6 months and 9 days to fully come back into compliance, which is by our September meeting, our quarterly meeting. So at this time, I will ask for a motion to go into our second closed session.
I make a motion, we go into closed session.
Is there a second?
Second.
There's been a motion and a second to go into our second closed session. Is there any discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. We will now go into closed session. And we are back into our meeting. Our board has voted to provide the service producer 6 months and 9 days to come fully into compliance by our September quarterly meeting, which is September 10th. With all of that being said, is there a motion to adjourn the meeting?
So moved.
Is there a second? All in favor, vote aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
Get your gavel.